So through the chair, we should be good for live stream now.
LED.
Joined.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our board meeting for Monday, June the 7th, 2021. This is Dawn Danko. I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with our land acknowledgement. The Hamilton-Wentworth District School Board acknowledges our presence on ancestral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee Confederacy land as determined by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. The intent of this agreement is for all nations sharing this territory to do so responsibly, respectfully, and sustainably in perpetuity. We respect the long-standing relationships with the local Indigenous communities, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Six Nations of the Grand River. At this time, we will play O Canada.
Joined. Joined.
Moving on to item 3, our meeting roll call. I'll just go through. If you can let me know if you're here. Trustee Archer.
Present.
Trustee Bingham.
Present.
Trustee Buck.
Present.
Trustee Deeth.
Present.
Trustee Galindo.
Present.
Trustee Johnstone.
Present.
Trustee Miller.
Present, thank you.
Trustee Pagan-Miller.
I'm here, yes, thank you.
Trustee Tutt.
Present.
Student Trustee Hespler.
Present.
Student Trustee Zakar. And I believe we have regrets. I just couldn't confirm for Student Trustee Zakar. We also have regrets for Trustee Mulholland and Sigawanagalvadat-Segi. I'll just remind everyone as we get started of our virtual meeting norms, so if you can make sure you're on mute if you're not speaking. I will make sure that when there's an action item, I do a roll call so everyone has an opportunity for questions. If there's not an action item for a report, then I will open up the floor and you can unmute yourself and identify if you'd like to ask a question. Also, I'll note that if someone says a comment where you would like clarification on the intent of the comment, you can call a point of clarification at any time. Moving along to approval of the agenda item 4, I am actually going to ask if Trustee Boots would consider amending the agenda to add a COVID update after item 10, given there have been a number of memos and announcements that impact the end of the school year. So I would like to move that. If there is a seconder, I believe Trustee Galindo, you were comfortable with seconding that?
That's correct.
Thank you. And so with the amended agenda, are there any further amendments or comments or questions? If you'd like to unmute yourself, if you'd like to speak.
Chair Danko?
Trustee Bach, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking at tonight's agenda, and I'm sorry I didn't notice this earlier, but I'm not seeing anywhere on here confirmation of minutes from our last meeting.
That is an excellent point. I did not notice that. We'll have to make sure that we do confirmation of minutes at our next board for 2 sessions. Thank you for noting that omission.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so with the agenda as amended with the COVID update following item 10, is anyone opposed? Hearing none, thank you. That passes. Item 5, declarations of conflict of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest to declare? I'll note that I haven't received any in writing. Hearing none, we'll go to reports from students, trustees, special committees. Our item 6 is policy from May 26, 2021. Trustee Miller, would you like to bring forward the report?
Yes, thank you, and through the chair. So we had our last policy committee of the year. We met on May 26th. There were a few consent items under the occupational health and safety policy, some minor changes in terms of language and just the annual review. There was also some changes to the workplace violence and harassment prevention policy. The committee considered the policy. It was up for its annual review. Minor changes were made to the term workplace to expand examples. Language has been updated to align with the Ontario Human Rights Code following the workplace harassment definition, and minor changes to clarify the role of staff in action required section to align with HWDSB's employment equity audit. Staff have been working with Turner Consultants as well as the Central Joint Health and Safety Committee. A complaint process has been developed. We also approved 2 scoping documents. The first for the human rights scoping document. The committee considered the human rights scoping document. The HWDSB Board of Trustees approved the development of the pillar human rights policy for the HWDSB.
Joined.
It will serve as an anchor to related policies and further HWDSB's commitment to foster and maintain a culture of human rights that permeate in all of our learning and work environments. The human rights policy development plan was shared with trustees, and staff will be developing a policy framework for all the policies moving forward, and that was carried unanimously by the committee. We also approved unanimously our anti-Black racism scoping report. This policy will support the HWDSB in addressing the urgent needs of our students. It was noted that when barriers are removed with one group, it supports the identifying of systemic barriers with other marginalized students. Staff outlined the content of the policy as well as the process. And staff is also recommending that the development of the anti-Black racism policy be done in consultation with Black students, educators, staff, community organizations, community members, and allies. And staff is also recommending that the development of this policy be done in parallel with the human rights policy to make sure that both are done from an intersectional and anti-oppressive lens. So that was carried unanimously, and with that, I would like to move the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. So the report is moved for approval, seconded by Trustee Bach. So we do have action items before us. I'll go through a roll call in alphabetical order and see if trustees have comments or questions. Trustee Archer?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Bingham?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Buck?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Deese?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Galindo?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Bacon-Miller?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Tutt?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Student Trustee Hessler?
No questions nor comments.
Thank you. I do want to add myself to the speakers list. I did have a question for staff. Certainly, I welcome the opportunity to start development of the human rights and the anti-Black racism policies. And I wanted to acknowledge that our elementary Teachers Federation, our local union, had previously delegated to the policy committee about the opportunity for a whistleblower policy. And at the time, it was a couple of years ago, we were pointed to where there is a statement embedded into our fraud prevention policy, but the intent of that request was really around the ability for people to bring forward concerns about the institution, the structure, and I think that there would be a really good fit with the human rights policy and possibly the anti-Black racism policy. So I was wondering through the director if there will be an opportunity as we're doing the scoping and the initial consultation to build the policy, if there's an opportunity to look at ways to build in whistleblower protection language as we might see done at other boards.
So through the chair, I'll add my piece and ask if Associate Director Peter Sobern could provide further insight as he's been closer to this. But to restate what you did say, correct. Originally, when boards, or our board looked at whistleblower, a lot of it was connected to whistleblowing regarding fraudulent behavior. But we know it's beyond that scope, and we know that boards have developed whistleblower policies for other reasons in terms of systemic or barriers or systemic human rights violations. Although we are developing a human rights complaint process and hiring for that, which still needs to live in some policy in terms of that process. So my best thinking, it could be discussed as part of this, and if it doesn't fit here, some boards have developed a separate whistleblower policy. But I'll ask Peter Sobern if he can comment, because he's been involved in the discussions when it pertains to this scoping document and this policy. Peter?
Thank you, Director. And through the chair, I would just echo the Director's comments that in the development of both the human rights pillar policy and the anti-Black racism policy, there would be opportunity through the consultation to include elements such as those coming forward to describe incidences that would be contrary to the policy, but that they would be, reluctant in terms of bringing those forward if they felt that doing so would potentially have negative consequences. So we will take that away and look to see where it would be most appropriate.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, we have the action items moved for approval and seconded. So to the Policy Committee Report, is anyone opposed? Hearing none, that passes. And now I just need to find the next report because I'll be bringing it forward. For item 7, I'd like to turn the chair over to Vice Chair Galindo.
Joined.
Vice Chair Galindo, are you with us? Well, if trustees will indulge me, I'll chair, but I'm bringing forward the Audit Committee Report from May 27, 2021. So for this report, you'll see it on 7-1 in your package, and you'll see that we had some monitoring updates before the Audit Committee, including an update on school board sector issues. One was on remote learning and just an update on where we were at the time, which was the end of May, where students were still in remote learning and we were waiting on direction from the Ministry and Public Health about a potential return to in-person learning. We also had an update on the 2021-22 budget process and highlighted the funding information received from the Ministry. There's a regional internal audit team update. Our regional internal audit manager presented the report and provided the annual independence assertion, and that complies with S1110 of the International Standards for the Professional Practice of Internal Auditing. Under other business, the Audit Committee confirmed dates for the next year. And, of course, we did note that one of the dates was November the 11th and requested that we look at alternatives to see if they could be considered. So with that, I will move to receive the report, and I was going to look to Trustee Bingham as a seconder. So there aren't any action items here. I'll just open the floor. Are there any comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, I will note Trustee Galindo has shared that he was booted off the call, but he's back, so he's present for the vote. So to receiving the Audit Committee report, is anyone opposed? Hearing none, that passes. Moving to reports from legislated committees, item 8 is our Special Education Advisory Committee report from May 26, 2021. Trustee Deese, would you like to bring forward the report?
Sorry, I wasn't able to attend the meeting. I don't know if Trustee Johnston was there, or...
I apologize, I missed that. I will turn to Trustee Johnstone to bring the report if she's able.
Yes, I can. Let me just pull... So through the chair for SEAC meeting, we last met May 26, 2021. Trustees will see that we had a number of information items as well as members' updates. With regards to information items, we had the pleasure of having Senior Manager of Business Services, Denise Dawson, attend and review the 2021-2022 budget. And I'll just relay that members of SEAC were that they wanted to communicate back, or at least they communicated through to Denise that they were pleased with many changes that they saw between the budget that Senior Manager Dawson originally presented to the committee versus the final recommended budget that is coming to trustees next week, which includes increases to the grants for student needs and restoration of many of the special education positions. So that report was well received. We also received special education plan updates from Superintendent Blair, including information on Behavioral Analytics Services Department. We and the timelines and when we would receive, some further information with regards to analytics. We also received the Learning Disabilities Association of Hamilton-Halton. So the committee did approve a change in representation for that commences September 2021. We also received member updates. I did bring forward an update from the Board of Trustees, and we also heard from Mark Counterpratt with the local, with the FASD Parent and Caregiver Support Program. And finally, we also received the Superintendent's update, and that concludes the report.
Thank you. So moving to receive the report, seconded by Trustee Deese. I'll turn to trustees and student trustees. Are there any questions? If you'd like to unmute yourself and signal if you'd like to be in the speakers list, we can work that way. Hearing none, is anyone opposed to receiving the Special Education Advisory Committee report? Hearing none, that passes. Next, we have item 9, report from Committee of the Whole, private session from earlier this evening. I'll turn to the Vice Chair to bring forward that report.
Thank you. Through the Chair, I'm bringing forward the following recommendations from tonight's Committee of the Whole private session: that the terms and conditions for Executive Council be approved for a 3-year term, September 2021 to August 2024, and that a letter be submitted to the Minister of Education as per Amendment 7.1 of the broader Public Sector Executive Compensation Act, requesting an exemption for HWDSB to unfreeze the current executive pay grid with no additional grid increases in order to avoid a risk of an Ontario Human Rights Code violation as HWDSB continues to implement their equity action plan, especially the Employment Equity Action Plan.
Thank you, Vice Chair Galindo, seconded by Trustee Tutt. So are there any comments or questions to the report? I'll just ask trustees to unmute themselves if they'd like to speak.
Sorry, Chair Dango, Trustee Johnstone, I'm hoping perhaps we might want to go through the speakers list.
Certainly. I'll start at the top of the alphabet, or sorry, maybe the bottom. I'll start with Student Trustee Hessler, and I'll work backwards. Student Trustee Hessler, did you have any comments or questions?
Nope, no comments nor questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Tutt?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Paikin-Miller?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Miller?
No comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone?
Yes, I do through the Chair. I want to appreciate, or I want to extend, my appreciation that this motion is being brought forward. Just reading through some of the revisions that were sent out to trustees tonight, I greatly appreciate the revision.
Trustee Johnstone, we're on the report from the Committee of the Whole. Is that what you're speaking to?
No, I'm not.
No, I didn't think so. Item 9 right now. And I'm just going to ask people to mute themselves if they aren't on mute, aside from Trustee Johnstone.
Sorry, my apologies. I scrolled through the package. I was wondering why no one was speaking to this item. Okay.
No, we'll come back to it in a moment.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll carry on through the list, though. Trustee Galindo, you brought forward the motion. Did you want to comment?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Dees?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Buck?
No comments or questions.
Thank you. Trustee Bingham?
No comments, no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Archer?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. So to approving the report from Committee of the Whole, is anyone opposed? Hearing none, we'll move to item 10, which is our written notice of motion. I'll turn that over to Vice Chair Galindo.
Thank you. Through the Chair, I am humbled to table the following notice of motion with myself as mover, and Trustee Bingham has offered to second the motion. I'll be reading an amended version of the motion. I did email an amended version of the motion to trustees and staff a few hours ago, and the changes are highlighted in red. So whereas Ryerson Elementary School is named after Egerton Ryerson, architect of the residential school system in Canada, whereas the bodies of 215 children were discovered at the Kamloops Residential School, Indian Residential School, confirming that many Indigenous people already knew. Whereas the policy that ripped Indigenous children from their families and placed them in residential schools amounted to cultural genocide as described by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015. Whereas we are still on a path to truth and reconciliation and must continue our work on Indigenous education so that all Indigenous students and staff feel that they belong and their identities are valued, recognized, and affirmed in our schools. Whereas the naming of a school should reflect HWDSB's mission, vision, values, commitments, and community composition, provide inspiration to students, have community acceptance, be appropriate for the whole district, have local, community, district, provincial, Canadian, or international significance, and, where appropriate and possible, address underrepresented groups as outlined in the Naming of Schools Procedure Policy 2.3. Be it resolved, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, that an Indigenous process that is both locally relevant and responsive be struck to rename Ryerson Elementary School through ethical engagement and in consultation with local Indigenous communities and key beneficiaries and stakeholders. Further, be it resolved that staff initiate a review of all HWDSB schools named after individuals in the spirit of truth and reconciliation to ensure they reflect our board's mission, vision, values, and the application of human rights, decolonization, anti-racism, and anti-oppression principles. Through the chair.
Thank you, Trustee Galindo, and I'll just confirm, Trustee Bingham, you'll be seconding the motion?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. So I'll turn to the mover to speak to the motion to start.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll speak to the process that I followed over the last week when I first learned about the tragic discovery of the 215 bodies at a residential school in Kamloops. And it came to my attention last weekend that one of our schools, of course, is named after Egerton Ryerson, who is the architect of the residential school system. It has been a week-long journey for me of reflection and unlearning and relearning that has brought us to where we are here today. In reality, the naming of a school should reflect the principles that I mentioned in the motion and should provide inspiration to students. Ryerson, a name we once considered to have a positive impact on student learning, we now realize does more harm to marginalize and alienate Indigenous staff and students and other minority groups. I think that this is a very small action that could have a big impact, but we still have a long way to go in terms of truth and reconciliation. And if we are serious about truth and reconciliation, then we must do more work on Indigenous education so that all Indigenous students and staff feel that they belong, that their identities are valued, recognized, and affirmed in our schools. And you can't do that with a name like Ryerson above the front entrance. I think that this work does fall in line with what we're doing in terms of our equity action as we develop a human rights policy and an anti-Black racism strategy. I recognize that I am a settler living on stolen land, and with my role here at HWDSB as a trustee, that comes with privilege, and with privilege comes responsibility, and really that's why I'm bringing forward this motion here today. I think the vision that I have for how this would be operationalized is one where we would essentially create an Indigenous-led process for naming this school, for selecting this name. I recognize that we are currently in the process of conducting a policy review of our school naming policy. In a perfect world, we would have done that policy review ahead of time. But given how the timing of this is sensitive, I think this might even be an opportunity for us to develop an entirely new process specific to Ryerson Elementary School, where we really create a whole new process for renaming a school. And my hope is that that new process could influence or inform what the outcome of this policy review for our renaming policy looks like down the road. So that's just something that I am mindful of. But at the end of the day, I don't want to speak for Indigenous peoples. I am not Indigenous. My goal is simply to elevate some of the voices that are often missing from decision-making tables, and I think that we can do that with this motion here today. And I'll leave that as my opening argument for now. But thank you, through the Chair.
Thank you. I'll turn to the seconder, Trustee Bingham. Would you like to bring any remarks?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I'm really hoping that the trustees at this table can see the impact in two areas. One, the discovery of the 215 innocent children in an unmarked mass grave struck a chord around the world. It wasn't just local, it was around the world. That has opened up a lot of eyes, a lot of hearts, and it's brought a lot of anger as well from a lot of different areas. It's all come from there. It's also showing us here in our local community that it is affecting many. It's a trigger for those who are residential survivors. It's a trigger for those who are still missing family. Many of them are right here in our community as well. So we need to be able to be mindful of those two things. I do say there are so many people who want to do the right thing, who want to be able to take this name down and put up something that's appropriate, and their heartbreak and their anger is one thing, but all of that together still cannot speak for the Indigenous community. The majority of what we are doing was triggered because of the students in Kamloops, and it needs to be reconciled here in our own board with our Indigenous community, with our Indigenous lead. We need to do some very thorough community work with our Indigenous groups. We need to be able to look at what we really are doing in our schools. And Truth and Reconciliation, have we actually done much? Do we have a lot of the Indigenous education going out there, or are we limiting ourselves? There is a huge amount. We need to be walking. We talk about to-go. We need to be walking beside our community, and this is one huge way that we can begin to walk beside our community. So I'm hoping that the trustees can see tonight what it is we're trying to do with this, because this whole motion can actually go forward into many areas and open up a whole new world and help a lot of people begin to understand what an Indigenous lens is about. My comment that I made this week, the very last thing that I said was the truth needs to be told, and we need to listen. And I believe in whatever we talk tonight with this motion, we're beginning. It's just a beginning of listening to our Indigenous community. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Bingham. So I'll start at the beginning of the alphabet and see if other trustees would like to have comments or ask any questions relating to the notice of motion. Trustee Archer.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Buck?
Thank you very much, Chair Danko. I do actually have something to add. I completely wholeheartedly agree with the spirit of this motion and appreciate so much the work that Vice Chair Galindo and Trustee Bingham have put into framing it and wording it and responding last week to last week's announcement of the 215 children that were discovered at Kamloops. I do wonder about one thing in particular, and that's in regards to our existing naming policy. And I don't see in the language here where we would first address our naming of schools policy and making sure that we've aligned the policy first so that we can fully address the needed change at the school and potentially other schools in regards to the naming of it. So I wondered if the motioner would be willing to accept a friendly amendment that would have us first address the policy so that we can then have a more fruitful renaming process for this elementary school.
Thank you, Trustee Buck. So you would, technically there are no friendly amendments. Are you proposing an amendment to the motion to first revise the renaming policy and then proceed with the motion?
Yes, that is accurate.
I'll turn to the mover, Trustee Galindo. Is that something that would be acceptable? And then we'll go through to see if there's a seconder for that amendment.
My concern would be with timing, Madam Chair. I'm afraid that it would simply take too much time to conduct a review of the school naming policy, and the school naming policy, as it stands, does not specifically take into consideration an Indigenous lens. My hope with this motion would be to circumvent the school naming policy in its current format or existence, create a new process for naming a school that is Indigenous-led, and hopefully from that we can learn and that can inform the process for the school naming policy review that is currently underway. So I would not accept that friendly amendment to the chair.
Thank you. Trustee Buck, did you want to proceed with putting that amendment on the floor? And I'll see if there's a seconder.
Maybe we could have staff respond in terms of how they would run with this tonight, or if this passes tonight, where we have language where it says that they're also to do a review of our other schools named after individuals. If they would interpret that to mean that the naming process, the renaming process, would then be initiated for those schools as well, or if that review would just give us a list of names to start with following the policy change that I anticipate, the much-needed policy change, so that we're reviewing what processes we're using with our naming committees. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I'll go to the director to start.
So thank you. Through the chair, looking at our current policy, any trustee can bring a motion forward to request a review of a current name. But in terms of process moving forward, there's many things happening in parallel. And I think as we are reminded by the Indigenous community around the two-row wapen belt, how we do things in parallel. So if this motion is approved this evening, then a process that staff would engage with the Indigenous community that's Indigenous-led to help us learn alongside how we would go about this one. And what we do here could also teach us, and we can learn from it, that will influence our policy review. And another thing that we'll also be working in parallel, as trustees are reminded, that the governance review that's occurring will also be looking at all of our policies with an Indigenous focus and an anti-race and anti-oppression lens. So that will be happening. So all of these things can happen in parallel. And I think in light of the information shared this evening, staff is ready to work through that process if approved this evening through the chair.
Thank you. To the Director, is it possible to clarify when there was an expectation for the policy review that had been directed previously by trustees?
So through the Chair, is the question around the timing of that? Is it through the Chair?
Correct.
Yeah. So I don't have through the Chair, I don't have the policy committee work plan in front of me for next year, but I know it's been asked to be put as a priority on the work plan for policy committee next year. So I can provide trustees with an update once I connect with trustee officer. I can ask you, I'm not sure if Associate Director Peter Sovin has any further information than what I provided regarding the timing of that. If I could ask Peter, thank you.
Thank you. And through the Chair, I don't have any additional information, Director.
Thank you. I'll just turn it back to Trustee Buck. Follow-up?
Thank you so much for that response, Director Figueiredo. For the sake of this evening's conversation, I'll put aside that amendment request and for the policy committee moving forward, I'd like to see us expedite the process for a renaming policy in the new school year. This is a conversation that I've had with colleagues who've been in this role for terms ahead of this current one. Much needed, lots of work to be done, and so this I just see as an extension of that good work. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that for now for the purposes of tonight, but in looking forward to better serving our community with this much-needed change.
Thank you. Trustee Deese.
Thank you. I do support this motion. I just have a question as we're sort of into June and the end of school is just a couple of weeks away. So I'm just wondering a timeline, if this is approved tonight, when will this committee be struck?
To the Director.
Through the Chair, if approved tonight, our first step as staff will be to connect to our Indigenous lead and our Indigenous community around this request. And instead of imposing, potentially timelines from us, we'd work with the Indigenous community and look in terms of what would be appropriate timeline, knowing that this is a priority for the board, but we want to involve them through the entire process, which would also include the timelines through the Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Deese.
Okay, so in other words, that we don't really know whether this would happen for the new school year, or would we, if it's not in place for the new school year, would we wait for the following school year, or would we do it mid-school year? To the Chair.
Director Figueiredo.
So through the Chair, understanding Trustee Deede's question is that once the process is developed and the recommendation comes to the trustees, I guess the question is, can we change a name of a school mid-year, or do we have to wait till September startup? I think all those things can be played out as part of how we will, if approved, make that change. But we can, through Board of Trustees approval, make a change of a school even in the middle of a school year. Through the Chair.
Thank you. Trustee Deese?
Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. Through the Chair. So I would like to start by sincerely thanking Trustees Galindo and local trustee Bingham for bringing forward this motion tonight. I want to echo the words of my fellow colleague who spoke earlier, who talked about Hamilton's heartbreak and anger over the discovery of the 215 children who were buried in mass grave in Kamloops, BC. I think that since this discovery has come forward, we have seen through the media and we have seen online, we have heard discussions within our own local classrooms that this discovery has had a tremendous impact on our students, staff, and families. I think, too, that I want to highlight the further comments of my colleague where she talked about the importance of truly honoring the dish with one spoon wampum belt and truly having two nations walking side by side and what that means. I think that the motion brought forward is rooted in good intentions, and I also sincerely appreciated hearing from one of my colleagues this evening who spoke about a process of listening, unlearning, and relearning over the past week and a half. And I hope that all of my fellow trustees have undergone such a process, and I hope that this process has also been engaged by many of our fellow Hamiltonians, and certainly in our classrooms, as we've had some very challenging discussions over what this discovery has meant to our students, staff, and families. I do have a question, which is, before deciding to change the name, was there any consultation with our local nations, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, as well as the Six Nations of the Grand River? Were they involved in the process?
Thank you, Trustee Johnston. I'm going to turn to the mover for some context and clarification, and perhaps they can share what has happened so far and perhaps clarify the intent of the motion.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, it's a really good question. When I first drafted this motion, that was my primary concern. My intention was informed by a series of conversations that I had with a few individuals, but I was also aware of the fact that, and with those conversations, I was conscious of the fact that a notice of motion would have been due about a week ago. So in an effort to submit that on time, I submitted the notice of motion, but then I continued engaging in conversations with many individuals that self-identified as Indigenous. Because as I mentioned in my earlier comment, the last thing that I want to do is speak for Indigenous people. I don't want to make an assumption through a colonial lens of what the best outcome is for Indigenous peoples. But of the many conversations I have had in the last week and how they've informed the amended motion now, I am aware that everyone that I spoke to who identified as Indigenous really wanted strongly to have the school renamed. Now, in the event that we begin this Indigenous process that is yet to be determined, in the event that the Indigenous community does, in fact, want to keep the name Ryerson, although I would be very surprised if that is the outcome based on the discussions I've had with members from that community. In the event that that is a desire, nothing stops them from submitting that as the recommended name that they would like to keep. And if we look at some of the renaming processes that we've followed in the past with a few other schools, Collegiate, for example, went through a renaming process and it remained Collegiate. And another example would be Eastdale Elementary School. So I'm not too concerned about whether or not it'll remain as Ryerson. It's more the process that I want us to follow that would be Indigenous led, and through that perspective and lens as well. I hope that answers the trustee's question.
Thank you, Trustee Johnson. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. And I sincerely appreciate the comments from the mover, particularly that the focus here is on the process itself. I would agree. And not knowing what that process should look like as we turn to the New Credit First Nation and the Six Nations of the Grand River, as well as the HWDSB's HM&I Advisory Committee, as well as system leaders. I think that if this motion passes tonight, I am looking forward to learning more from and listening and continuing this process of listening and learning. I'll just add the final comment, which is over the last number of school naming process that has come to the board, there's been increased expression of concerns being raised and around the process of choosing names. I know fellow colleagues have also raised concerns about how when we choose a name today, when we name it after an individual, a school, after an individual, how quickly that name can not age well, or I guess as times change and new information comes about, or as new norms and I would say as new norms or come forward and as society evolves, names do not always stand up with the test of time. I am looking forward to the review of the naming of the school process, as well as looking at all of our schools across the system. I think that tonight, by passing this motion, it is a first step in the long process towards truth and reconciliation. So I will be supporting the motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnstone. Trustee Miller.
Hi, thank you, and to the chair. I mean, so much has already been said. I think the reality is that the Indigenous communities in our city are hurting for a very, very real reason, and a real reason that they have known for a very long time, and that I think a lot of us Canadians have known for a long time. And hopefully this is, it is a first step to look at our system, Ryerson in particular being the architect of the residential school model. But I'm also very, very enthusiastic about the second point here in this motion, that I think we need to do a real analysis of the school names across our system, and for lack of an eloquent way to say it, be really frank and honest about which of these names are harmful, which of the names carry traditions that do not align with our mission statements anymore, which of the names have more harm in them than good. So I'm hopeful that this motion can guide the way for it. In a lot of ways, this is a reaction and a necessary one. This is a call to listen, a call to action.
Around the corner, Dave.
And make sure everyone's on mute. Sorry, Trustee Miller, you're interrupted. Can everyone just check that they're on mute, please? Sorry, continue.
Sorry, thank you. I'm fully supportive of this, and I actually I'm eager to do the work. I'm eager to listen and to learn. But I'm also actually, I think this actually could, and perhaps we can continue this conversation with policy. I don't know that it would necessarily need to be an addition, but to also look at our team mascots and our team, any of our symbols associated with any of our schools, and to have some conversations as well as to whether all of our mascot names are appropriate and whether they actually fit all of our communities. But that's just an aside. I know that we have had these conversations that, even in my short term, I've sat through a couple of different school naming processes, and the conversation has come up again and again. How do we pick a name that is the appropriate name for the community? How do we decide who to honor in a naming process? If an individual is selected, are we sure that individual isn't problematic, doesn't carry potential trauma for any one of our student, any one of our identifying groups within our student community? And how we ask these questions in a way that is sensitive and led by the people who have the guidance to give and the space to hold these discussions that, sometimes are very, very difficult. So I'm hopeful that with this motion we can make space. We can kind of move out of the way a little bit for the Indigenous communities in our area. And I'm hopeful that we'll all actually grow through the process. So thank you. Those are just my comments for the motion. I'm in full support.
Thank you. Trustee Paikin-Miller?
Yes, I'm happy to support this motion. I think it's an excellent motion. I think what's happened with the residential school system is just horrendous. And to have found these graves and the whole picture of it just very disturbing. So I will be supporting this, and I also was lucky enough to be in Toronto a few years back, not long ago actually, a couple of years back, when the survivors of residential schools from all over the States and in this area in Canada had displays and showed what they do, and it was very moving to me. And so I will hope that we can actually name the Ryerson School after another Indigenous person. I've got a couple of ideas, but I think this is a great motion, and thanks for bringing it forward. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Trustee Tutt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Don't have any questions, just some comments. I think my colleagues have all, captured everything wonderfully tonight. I thank the two trustees for bringing this motion forward. I think it's been long overdue to have that undertake this review. I think it was said a little earlier that the entire First Nations community is hurting, and there's no doubt about that. I think we as a country should be hurting as well. We should be standing in lockstep against this type of injustice and reject all that's occurred and that we know, and I'm sure more details will come out. And unfortunately, more loss of life and graves may be tragically uncovered. There's no doubt, I think this is a tragic stain on our history as a country, and I think, again, one of the trustees earlier had stated that this is just the first step for us on this school board to work towards truth and reconciliation, although that journey may be long. It's our small contribution towards that. I would just echo, and I encourage all trustees to support this motion, because I don't think that there's no longer any more time for talk. I think now is the time for action, at least for us as a school board. And this, I think Trustee Galindo had mentioned a little earlier that this past week, he's had to learn and unlearn and then relearn again. And as I've kind of gone through a similar process, learning more about what had occurred and just how extensive, the tragedy reached. As I spoke to people, I heard some critical things through my comments with folks, and I know it's very easy to say that statues or names, removing them from buildings, may not, do much or, don't right the wrongs. I've heard that quite a bit. But I say to the folks that share that viewpoint that it's easy to say that when it's not your community or your family, your children, who all maybe systematically are being separated and then having your culture erased. I say that symbols have meanings, and they can be a painful reminder of how policies of this country just how wrong they were in the past. And I think, in my humble opinion, at no point should an individual or a symbol that's contributed and influenced the creation and design of, let's say, the residential school system should be celebrated or memorialized, especially by putting its name on top of a public institution like, let's say, a school, an elementary school or a secondary school. I think we've come far as a country, and I mean, we're not perfect. But if we're serious about recognizing this history and this injustice, then I think as all citizens, we need to do what's right. I think this board needs to do what's right, and we should undertake this review. And hopefully we can get to a place where when we look at naming, when we look at symbols, that we won't have to go back and go through the painful process of recognizing that it was a controversial pick or it's causing pain to a certain community. So with that, I'll be supporting this motion. And again, thank you for bringing it forward. Those are my comments, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Student Trustee Hessler.
No questions. I do have one comment, however, just that I'm extremely grateful that this motion is being brought forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I go back to the mover for closing remarks, I'll just add myself to the speakers list. Really much of what I had to say has been said. I think I know that it's impacted myself and my family, the discovery of 215 children's bodies at a residential school in Kamloops in an unmarked grave. It's tragic and it's devastating. And what really struck me was that this has been known from, many, many years, but certainly it was shared when they went through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and it's only now that many Canadians are actually understanding that it's real, because it's just horrific. The one thing when I saw this motion first come forward that I wondered about, and I really appreciate that the movers clarified this, is have we consulted? Because I know what my reaction has been. I know what the community's reaction has been, and trustees have spoken about, the grief, the anger in the community. But I don't believe it's for us to determine what needs to happen here. I think we need to, I think someone said it nicely, we need to make space for the Indigenous community, our Indigenous leads, our Indigenous committee, to let us know what they need. And so I think this motion allows for real, authentic consultation and an opportunity to really learn alongside our Indigenous community and partners, and to really, as mentioned, take those steps towards truth and reconciliation, and this is just one opportunity. I also appreciate the discussion about a broader look at names and mascots, et cetera, across our school system, and looking at how our policy has gotten us here and maybe how our policy is not serving everyone in our community well. So I think there are many opportunities and steps to be taken here. I do appreciate the motion. I absolutely support it, and I particularly support that we are going to be looking to the Indigenous community to let us know what it is they wish for us to do, and that opportunity to learn is just critical. So with that, I will turn it back to the mover, Trustee Galindo.
Thank you, Chair Danko. As we end the first week of National Indigenous History Month, the absolute horror of finding the remains of 215 children at the Kamloops Indian Residential School further marks a current nationwide month-long call to unlearn and reflect on the history and heritage of Indigenous peoples in Canada as urgent and critical. The truth is, Indigenous communities have been expressing the intergenerational trauma of residential schools for a long time, and today, even if just for a little bit, we are listening, and I hope that we continue to listen, because as settlers on Turtle Island, there is a continuing obligation, both individually and collectively, to address reconciliation and our unmet responsibilities to Indigenous peoples. It is vital that we not only confront Canada's dark past, but also be mindful of honor this and remain guided by the principle of cultural humility. The intent of this motion is to amplify Indigenous voices, but I'm also mindful of the trauma that Indigenous people have experienced and continue to relive. Being mindful of the calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think that this is a very small action that could have a big impact. This is not just a time for learning and unlearning and addressing concerns, but a time for action. And with that, I conclude my concluding statement. Thank you. Through the chair.
Thank you, Trustee Galindo. So to the motion as listed before you, I do have it here. So to the motion, be it resolved that in consultation with the HWDSB Indigenous team, I apologize, let me read the revised version. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, that an Indigenous process that is both locally relevant and responsive be struck to rename Ryerson Elementary School through ethical engagement and in consultation with local Indigenous communities and key beneficiaries and stakeholders. And to the motion, further be it resolved that staff initiate a review of all HWDSB schools named after individuals in the spirit of truth and reconciliation to ensure they reflect our board's mission, vision, values, and the application of human rights, decolonization, anti-racism, and anti-oppression principles. Is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, that passes. And we'll move along now to our next item. Thank you, trustees and student trustee Hessler. Our next item is our COVID update through the amended agenda. And at this time, I'm going to direct trustees. You did have a presentation or a few slides for reference emailed to you if you would like to bring those up. And I will turn this over to the director.
Thank you, through the chair.
Left.
For this verbal update, a slide deck was sent out by Tracy McKillop later on this afternoon. It's actually update number 13. We had one scheduled on the 14th, but in light of, as the chair said, recent announcements last week, I thought it would be important to provide some updates that we've received from the ministry. If you look at slide 2, again, what I've highlighted has been our 5 guiding principles throughout this challenging year. around safety for all, minimizing disruption to regular school day routines as much as possible, ease of transition between potential scenarios, honoring collective agreements and employee terms and conditions as much as possible, and fiscal responsibility. And I wanted to highlight number 3, staff had been preparing for what we were hoping would have been a transition commencing this week, which was a return from remote to in-person. But on June 2nd, the ministry did announce that students would remain in remote for the duration of the year, minus students with pervasive special education needs who are coming in person would continue. If you look at slide 3, at our weekly board, both boards and public health leadership meeting, I did speak to our Chief Medical Officer of Hamilton, and she did share with me an excerpt from the letter that all Chief Medical Officers from all regions shared unanimously with the ministry and the province when they were looking for advice around potentially reopening or shifting from remote to in-person. And on slide number 3, we'll read what it says, that in terms of low short-term impact, the Chief Medical Officers had indicated to the science table that modeling suggests that the total increase in cases that would result from reopening schools is small. Most public health units believe that they can mitigate and manage those increases in their communities. As you heard, that potentially reopening schools could increase cases between, I think it said 6 to 11%. In Hamilton, with cases just below, let's say, around 50, a 10% increase if we open schools for 3 weeks would have meant here potentially managing 5 more potential positive cases. The second part indicated about reopening schools regionally and manage the risk. The Chief Medical Officers indicate that schools can reopen safely on a regular basis on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, the local medical officers of health, and school districts and health system partners. Schools that reopen should maintain their public health measures vigorously and build on the strategies they have already deployed to limit spread. Parents and guardians will also play an important role in limiting spread by recognizing that a school reopening does not signify any other changes to the stay-at-home order as long as it remains in place. In making this recommendation, we assume that the province's reopening framework will continue as announced and that other sectors will stay closed until the reopening framework opens them. And the last comment on this slide, as we know that the Ministry of Education did then decide with the province that schools will remain in remote until June. Shortly following that news, which was very disappointing, I know, for the senior team, as we had been preparing and hoping that the best way to support students with their well-being and mental health and staff would be to return, whether it be for 2 to 3 weeks, to bring some closure to this a very difficult school year in person under the protocols and frameworks we had in place. Slide 4 highlights the other updates we did receive, but I'm really going to focus on the most relevant one. We did receive, following on June 3rd, a memo from the ministry that highlighted again student supports, mental health supports, to make all of them aware to our parents that we currently still have remotely. Summer learning and learning recovery and renewal, to be planning for that. To maintain targeted testing. Again, the vaccination rollout, as we know that it's continuing to accelerate for 12 to 17-year-olds. It did highlight around boards having to put in a protocol around personal property retrieval, that being for
Carol Pakin-Miller.
For students who still have personal property in the schools to be able to retrieve it like we did last spring. In addition, for boards to then collect their resources as well, whether it's technology and other learning resources in terms of managing our assets. Childcare would be extended, emergency childcare for our sector. Also talked about local public health updates, to continue to receive updates from them as you're working through your plans, and that further information would be coming around end-of-year celebrations, as there was The Premier did highlight this, and it did create confusion as boards like Hamilton have been already working on year-end graduations, especially for our grade 8s and grade 12 students, and our hope that the rest of the celebrations would have occurred in person because students would have been returning. But unfortunately, that was not the decision made. Slide number 5, you can see some of the areas I've already spoken to, but I'll highlight the guiding principles that we were using when we were planning sort of our year-end closures and celebrations was really around equity of access. So if we were in remote, to make sure that proper school year celebrations would be part of the programming in a remote fashion. Also, safety of students and teachers, and also respecting the professional judgment and well-being of our educators, as many are also volunteering for the grade 8 and grade 12 plans that have been put in place. But as of today on slide 6, this is a regulation change we received. The ministry, the province changed the regulation that had been filed regarding reopening of Ontario, the Flexible Response to COVID-19 Act 2020, to provide publicly funded and private schools with the opportunity to invite students to return to school in June for short outdoor celebrations. This regulation highlights 5 requirements. End of school year celebrations must meet the following 4 requirements must meet the following requirements. 1, celebrations should be organized by class for elementary school and by homeroom or quadmester class for secondary schools, and a maximum of 2 guests per student can attend. 2, all celebrations should take place outdoors. No indoor celebrations are permitted. 3, celebrations should only take place where physical distancing can be maintained. And 4, gathering before and after celebrations will not be permitted. The next slide 7 in the regulation highlighted all the health and safety requirements. I'll just quickly speak to them. The requirement of self-screening for these celebrations, on-site screening for these celebrations, required to take attendance for these celebrations, the requirement of physical distancing, the requirement of masking for students grades 1 to 12 for these outdoor celebrations, making sure there's hand hygiene stations, and that access to school buildings should be avoided except where required, i.e. gathering personal belongings, and that use of gowns for any kind of graduation is not permitted. On slide 8, in the which the regulation highlights possible approaches, such as we were planning or have planned for our grade 8 and grade 12 graduations, which are outdoor recognition ceremonies by class, homeroom, quadmester, outdoor assemblies by class, homeroom, or quadmester, outdoor class meetings in conjunction with retrieval of personal belongings, and the last piece, driving or walking parades, which we had already part of our plan for grade 8 and grade 12. In slides 9 to 12, the Board of Trustees, you can see, thank you, Superintendent Jay McPherson and Superintendent Paul Denemy, who have highlighted the in-person graduation events and what's been planned in collaboration with Hamilton Public Health to make sure safety expectations are in place for walk and or drive-through celebrations. And Public Health has indicated support for the walk and or drive-through celebrations to occur at our elementary and secondary schools for our grade 8 and grade 12 grads. So you will see that it highlights students and their household units will be scheduled by appointment. Elementary remote learning program students will be included in these celebrations. Staff volunteers will support with safety measures and management. Staff, students, and household units are required to complete screening, wear masks, and maintain a distance of at least 2 meters. And students work through stations. Example, certificate pickup, photo station, spirit wear station, award station, graduation sign station, device return station, etc. And Public Health had clearly indicated that they wanted all public all stations to be 4 meters have 4 meters of distance between them, and to be contactless as much as possible. You can see in slide 10 from feedback we heard last year, thank you to our procurement department and our communications department, who've created lawn signs that are personalized for every school. So you'll see an example on slide 10 of the Bernie Custis Secondary School 2021 graduate sign. And you'll see an example of the school banner here on slide 11 for our
Joined.
Committee has generously provided funds for celebratory banners for every school. And you can see on slide 12, which is my last slide, the dates that we have staff and we're working hardly through the advisory committees to work through really focusing energy and time on the grade 8 and grade 12 graduations, which are the 2 key milestones for our students. And again, I'll just close with the regulation today. Staff is processing what has occurred, and I'll just say from a director's perspective, understand the perspective, concerned about the demands and workload for principals and staff for all grades, all classrooms, and what this would entail, especially when students are not returning for the last 3 weeks of school, which I believe, after reading the advice of public health, would have been the best approach to take for the well-being of our students and our staff, and to bring proper closure to the end of the school year for all students. So through the chair, that is my update of what's transpired since last week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Director, for the update. We did feel it was important that trustees had an opportunity to have a discussion about this and also hear the details. Also, we wanted to make sure that details for graduations and the challenges around what has been suggested through announcements at the provincial level, what that would mean for our system. And so we want to make sure we're setting clear expectations. I do, before I go to trustees, just want to share that in the Minister Chair call today, the focus was on the inappropriate, I'm going to call it, communication from Premier Ford about the feasibility and the possibility of outdoor ceremonies. One chair said, it feels like trustees and school boards and staff across the province have been thrown under the bus. And there was a request to have Mr. Ford make a clarifying statement, because it's very clear, I think we've heard from some of our families, excitement about the possibility of what you see on Netflix for an outdoor ceremony for graduation, and we know that that's really just not possible. So I hope the director's update has clarified what's in the memo and also the work that's happening at our board. So I'll go through the trustees. Let's see. I think I'm in reverse order this time, starting with Student Trustee Hessler. I'll just go through the list to see if there are comments or questions. Student Trustee Hessler?
Yes. Thank you, and through the chair. I did have a couple questions and some comments as well. I'm just trying to find the correct slide so you guys can all see what I'm looking at as well. Slide 8 here for the possible approaches for reopening. It's my understanding right now the board's kind of trying to decide between a quadmister style and an adapted method of that. Has there been any attempt really to communicate with students, parents, families on which style they prefer for when the possible reintroduction to in-person occurs?
Thank you. To the director?
Thank you, through the chair, and to Student Trustee Hessler. Your question's a good one. That's going to come next week when we give the update on next year's plan. But the language you see here on slide 8 is the language that I pulled out right from the regulation change to Ontario reopening. The reason the province, I think, used this terminology is that some boards this year are quadmestering. But to your question, we'll be bringing a final update, and we're gathering a bit more input from stakeholders regarding that. But our first step is to get some advice from public health about what is possible around models for next year. So that conversation's happening first before we reach out any further. But I know we've staff spoken to the student trustees to get some insights already, so we thank you for that. But this is about, this slide is about the regulation change and what they expect from school boards regarding year-end graduations and celebrations for this June.
Left.
Thank you. Student Trustee Hessler?
Yeah, thank you, and through the chair. Yes, I'll be sure to save some of my later questions about that for the next meeting when we really go into depth about it. As for some of my comments, I just wanted to express how happy I was to see all these graduation plans in place. I feel like it's a really big thing, and just that students have really missed out on it as well. I think it's really nice to see all the work that the board's trying to put into it to really make it a memorable experience.
Joined.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Tutt?
No questions. I'll just, two quick comments. I'll thank the director for that comprehensive report, so thank you for that. I also thank the chair for calling out the premier. I think that was well done as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I'll note Trustee Paikin-Miller had to leave the meeting. Trustee Miller?
Thank you, and through the chair, I appreciate the presentation of this report. I know that staff have been dealing with just navigating all of the new information. So I do appreciate the time that went in to make sure that trustees were up to date with exactly, what statements have been made, what rules we are trying our best to follow. I have to echo the comments made by the director. It's so incredibly disappointing that we are not returning to in-person learning after the year that we have had. It is so incredibly hurtful, frankly irresponsible how school boards have been handed this information time after time, every update coming via the media, comments around an expectation for graduation for each individual school grade. And while I want to celebrate every single student in our system because they deserve it, because it has been quite the year, and our students have done what they can and done their best, and a lot of them are struggling to keep it all together, and families are struggling to keep it all together, and teachers and DAs and, every single person in our school system is struggling to keep it all together. And I am just, to be honest, livid at the way that we have been handed this information and these expectations. It is under the guise of trying to, mark the last celebrations, but what it has effectively meant that if we need to plan ceremonies for every single grade, how do we then focus in on the real classes that are really making the big transitions? I'm thinking of our grade 8s and our grade 12s, students who would have been working towards those goals for years. And like I said, it's not to take away any credit from any other student in our system, but to treat graduation as something that can be turned on and off by the flick of a switch is really, it's I don't know, we're all exhausted at this point. I'm trying to think of all of the different ways that I can say the same thing, and I am running out of words. I'm also just really frustrated that in all the expectations that have been placed on school boards around this province, I have seen not the same motivation from this government to make sure that our schools were as safe as they could be. I'm very proud of the work that we have done, the work that our staff has done. I'm very proud of the fact that time and time again, this Board of Trustees approved more and more money from our reserves to make our class sizes as small as possible. We dedicated ourselves to making our schools as safe as possible, even though it should have been the ministry and it should have been the province leading that work. I'm very proud of what we've done, but very just so incredibly disappointed that the lack of appropriate funding and the inability to address the real safety of COVID-19 within our schools has meant that we've had to do it for our students, and it's meant that our kids cannot close out their year. I have, a child who's in grade 3, and he's missing his periods. He's missing that day-to-day structure, that interaction, and I have a child who is finishing her first full-day kindergarten session and has not had a single normal year. And it's a lot. And so to be faced with these updates in the way that they are so haphazardly presented to us through the media, it just feels callous. I'm sorry, I will not keep going because I'm sure other folks want to share their comments, but I'm just so incredibly disappointed that our local public health units haven't been able to provide the guidance that they were, that they are the experts at, and that we haven't had the appropriate funding and leadership from this provincial government. But thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, a couple comments. One, this government makes no sense. I will just say that to announce that students are not returning to school in one breath, and then the next to state that school board should be hosting outdoor graduation ceremonies is it makes no sense by their own reasoning. So I will state that. I also want to state that a profound and sincere and heartfelt appreciation and thanks for all of our educators across HWDSB who continue to rise to the challenges and continue to work to meet the needs of our students, to go the extra mile, all of the planning that has been going into the graduation ceremonies and all of the planning that has been going into the programming for our students, both this past year as well as 3 active plans, potential plans, 2 of which will ultimately be dismissed, but being put in place for September's back-to-school return. All of this work is it does not go unrecognized. I truly feel that our educators are the unsung heroes throughout this pandemic. So much of their work is done behind the scenes and is done so well that we have received very few complaints, if any, over the past year. I think I want to express my sincere thanks to all of our staff across the system who have been putting in this great work. I did have one question through the chair to the director or the appropriate staff person with regards to the grade 8 and grade 12 graduations, first off, sincere appreciation that we are putting out the lawn signs this year. I do have a question. I did see with some of the other boards there was student choice in what, swag was being provided to students. I did see from some of the other boards surveys where students were able to choose between, say, a lawn sign or something else, like, for example, they're not backpacks, but they're backpacks, among other items. I'm wondering, were we able to do any consultation with our students? So I'll just throw that question out there.
To the Director?
Through the Chair to Trustee Johnstone, before I pass it over to Trustee Denemy, I believe it's the lawn sign, and what we heard last year was a generic sign, although appreciated last minute was not as personalized, and that everyone did want a sign that was based on their own school logo. But to your further question, I'll pass to Superintendent Denemy, who's been leading the advisory committee. To Paul, please.
Thank you. And through the chair, so all students in grade 8 and grade 12 will be receiving lawn signs or house signs that will be available for all. The guiding principle that the ad hoc used was seeking community feedback and student feedback. This was done in February and through March through the thought exchange. This then gave us our premise or outline of the sketch of what graduations could possibly look like in consultation with public health. From there, schools individually went back and worked with their own staff teams and their own student advisories on what would be feasible and what would be necessary, or what students would like to honor that day. So as a board, we do not have a systematic approach of you have a choice of this, or this. However, schools have taken use their own autonomy to decide what is best for that grad process and what best to use at a local level. So, for example, last year a number of schools handed out T-shirts, but some schools heard from their student bodies that that's something that they wouldn't like. They would like something else, a part of swag, or even to do something else within that celebration. So, sorry, a very long answer to your question, Trustee Johnstone, is really it's back to this. All students will receive a sign, and it's school autonomy on how they're celebrating and any potential swag that they're handing out using student and staff voice.
Trustee Johnstone?
That's great. Thank you very much. And again, I just want to state how much I appreciate all of the work that has been done, and that student voice has been front and center throughout this process and the creation of new processes as we try to navigate these unprecedented times. So thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Galindo.
Thank you. Through the chair, I do just want to echo the comments of my colleagues. I think, I think about what we're doing to honor education staff who have given it all these past few months, planning virtual grads that honor our students while also delivering remote learning that they largely taught themselves. We're even honoring parents or parent committees that have helped plan these grads, only to have those plans tossed up in the air by an announcement that had really no consultation, apparently. I do just want to echo my disappointment there as well, but echo the good work that is being done by our staff and the director. I'm looking forward to seeing what the end result ends up being, but you have my full support. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Dees?
I don't think any questions. I mean, I think that, it's been said, and I think just echoing the frustration and hearing from parents and them trying to sort it out as we're trying to sort it out. So appreciate all the work of staff and what's gone into this. So thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Buck.
Nothing really to add, other than just to say my colleagues have already articulated so well the frustration of last week's announcement and lack of consultation with boards in that announcement. So thank you to everyone else that came before. You articulated it well.
Thank you. Trustee Bingham.
There's no questions, and like everyone, just saying the exact same thing. It's a disappointment that comes out of our government continuously. The disappointment is for everyone. You hear it last minute. There's no time to react. I say thank you to our staff for being able to try and keep up with what's going on, maybe a step ahead of things if possible. It's just been crazy. There needs to be more responsibility on the side of the government, and it certainly isn't happening. But I do want to not only thank our staff, I want to thank the students, and I want to thank all the families, the caregivers, because they're getting thrown everything at them at the last minute, and it's not easy. Not easy at all for any of us, but especially at that, trying to figure out right from JK right through to grade 12. Every one of them, every family. It's the term unprecedented has been used so often, but what other word can there be? And yet everybody is somehow taking all the disappointment and bouncing back and continuing. And I really appreciate everything that our families, especially our staff, our core of absolutely everything to do with the education system here at HWDSB is just being incredible to be able to watch that bounce back as well. And I think everybody deserves a break from it all, but when is that going to come? I'm not sure. But I just want to thank absolutely everybody who's there. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Archer?
Everything's been said, so I'm not going to repeat it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do have some things to add and a few questions. I appreciate what's been said. I would echo the thanks to staff, to students, to families. A couple of things that I wanted to point out about the announcement. One, our public health has shared that they were disappointed, they accept, but are disappointed with the ministry's announcement that we are not going back in person, and that it is against the advice of medical health experts and the team that they were part of. So I believe the director clearly highlighted that, even 10% increase in cases for 3 weeks of in-person schooling would be about 5 to 6 cases in all of Hamilton. And it's unfortunate that if you look provincially across the province, we're looking at 90 cases. It is not thousands. It's unfortunate the way moving up reopening for other things was moved ahead of education. So when I look at this, I wanted to ask a few questions. So the ministry has given us this direction that we should try to provide some sort of in-person closure at the end of the school year, but there's a lot of restrictions around that. I was wondering if the director, if you could help me understand, what does this mean for our students that we know are most marginalized families? So this often includes racialized families or people from low socioeconomic backgrounds who have been most impacted by the pandemic. So I'm thinking, in particular, would those families be able to access something through the school day, and is that the expectation for a short visit? Would they have transportation provided by the board? What happens if an older sibling is actually caring for a younger sibling and they have different times? Can you just talk to me about the feasibility of what the government has proposed?
Oh, thank you, Chair, for your question. So when I look at this as objectively as I can, when I read the regulation and requirements, I went back to the guiding principles. We were planning for our grade 8 graduation around, equity of access for all students having the ability to participate. I look at this, and what I'm worried about is for celebrations for every class when schools are not open, the first thing I'm worried about is access to get to school, for parents who rely heavily on transportation. That question was asked today by a chair of the minister, and the response was that would be up to individual boards to decide if they're going to provide transportation. But the feasibility to that would be very complex because visits, our transportation are based on start times and end times. They're not just for an hour windows. So transportation at this point in time, logistics for that would almost be impossible to coordinate. In terms of having celebrations for every grade or every classroom with all those safety protocols outdoors will be challenging. We know that the grade 8 graduation celebration as outlined here and the grade 12, it's not just the grade 8 teachers providing the support or certain grade 12 teachers who teach grade 12. It's the entire staff that comes together to plan for that key celebration, key milestone. So if we're asking other educators to plan for in-person celebrations aside, it inevitably will pull away people who have planned and worked towards the grade 8 and grade 12 piece. So and the last thing I'll say around my concern around all the public health measures, we know how hard the team has worked to put those public health measures approved by public health for just the grade 8 and grade 12 and all the station requirements. The challenge I'm seeing here is finding a time that works for everyone to come at different times when schools aren't open and to monitor all those requirements. So I've heard from some school leaders and principals who are very worried around the responsibility they have for safety in schools and ensuring that all these pieces are in place and our staff as well. Easier to do self-screening, on-site screening, attendance, distancing, masking when we're in person and we have our protocols in place. Staff are worried about ensuring that they can meet all these health and safety requirements outdoors throughout a certain window of time. And the last thing would be that if staff are required to do this, they would, how can they be available for remote learning and to continue that expectation if they have to be in person and try to coordinate a time with all their colleagues. So these are some of the challenges I've been hearing from staff, and what I've been hearing is that we hope that we continue to focus the resources on the key milestones, which are grade 8 and grade 12, and honor the professional judgment of educators to find some form of year-end closure for our students, whether that be, remotely or in person, and to manage those expectations. But many are worried about what they've read in the regulation today with all the health measure requirements. Through the chair.
Thank you. And I will note that there's certainly been some media coverage that Premier Ford said he was extremely disappointed when boards started sharing that they would not be doing in-person ceremonies outdoor at schools because of so many of the challenges that you've highlighted. And it feels like there's a intention to shift blame and maybe any frustration about this end of the year not being in person to school boards. I'm wondering, you did say that staff were hoping for a return to in-person. We certainly were prepared for it. What's the feasibility if we were to get permission, recognizing that we would need permission from the ministry? What is the feasibility of completing the last week, 5 to 7 days in elementary in person? Is that something that would be possible and practical without overwhelming staff?
So through the chair, in terms of feasibility, last week on June 2nd, we had our teams ready to transition back to in-person from remote, just like we did in February when we had to return February 8th, I believe the date was. So to your question, what would be the feasibility if the ministry approved a board or students to return in person for the last week or so? Staff, had those plans ready already. Of course, we would need ministry approval for that, and I guess public health support. But based on what public health has put in writing already, we know that public health actually did support a return in person. So, a long way to say that last week, by Wednesday, we were ready, and we had our plans in place to have students return today. So that would have given us about 4 or 5 days opportunity to transition back to in person.
Thank you. And so you've just given the challenges with equitable access to anything in person for our students, given the challenges around the proposed protocols that the ministry has given us, so they support students coming in person for these outdoor ceremonies. Given that public health supports a return to in-person learning, and given a shorter period of time would reduce the risk of those 6 cases even further, I wonder if trustees would support requesting permission from the ministry to allow our elementary students to go back in person for 5 to 7 days, that last week and a bit of school, because we finished on a Tuesday. And I'm not sure what the sense would be from trustees, so what I'll do is maybe just open the floor to see if there's interest in writing a letter requesting that, and sort of turning the tables and putting the responsibility back on the ministry for this decision. And I had a note that if I made that a formal motion, Trustee Johnston would second it. But what I'll do, I guess we can just run maybe quickly through the list. So I would move that as a formal motion that we write a letter to the ministry requesting permission, with the support of our public health, to have our elementary students return to in-person learning for 5 to 7 days at the end of the school year, so that they can enjoy social gatherings that mimic the celebrations they're proposing. So moved by myself and seconded by Trustee Johnstone. So I'll just move through quickly. Trustee Archer, any thoughts or questions about that?
Yes, I do. It's a great idea, but I'm wondering if we have enough time, since we're already in our first week of June. By the time they receive the letter and respond, is there enough time for staff to get ready? Thank you.
Great question. To the Director?
So through the chair, I think if this is passed tonight, we'll have to act quickly to have a letter with a clear ask based on the motion to be shared with the minister within 48 hours. That if we can get it to the ministry in 48 hours, then we can await a response. And we can also, if approved, inform our local public health, that if approved this motion, that this is also occurring, so they are aware. Through the chair.
Thank you. Trustee Archer?
Will there be enough time for staff to be prepared and open the schools for this?
To the Director.
Yes, through the chair. If we're referencing the last week or last 7 days, I'm just quickly looking at my calendar, that would be June 21st. So we would need a response by the ministry by Wednesday, June 16th, so we could transition. But like I said, we already had plans in place to return June 7th, which did not occur. So the answer is yes, through the chair.
Thank you. Trustee Archer?
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Trustee Bingham?
I support the motion 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Buck?
I wonder about the week that we're requesting. In a typical year, the last week of June is very laid back. Is that would parents be able to count on instructional time actually occurring, or is this meant to be social gatherings that focuses more on building relationships or renewing relationships that have had to kind of fall by the wayside in terms of physical presence with one another? Or what is the balance exactly that we're hoping for here?
Thank you. I can just state as the mover that my hope is that there's that opportunity to focus on relationships and that socialization that students have missed out on. But I'll turn to the director from an educator perspective.
Yes, through the chair, that would be a realistic expectation. Typically, the last week of school, there's a lot of operational matters that are addressed, collection of resources, celebrations. But I think this year what we've heard around students feeling isolated, being able to connect with their peers, teachers also feeling that way, wanting to connect with their students, this would provide an opportunity not for academic rigor, but for a real focus on relationships and the social and emotional well-being of students, and to provide a safe structure for these year-end celebrations, and to be able to provide some year-end school operational things like having students retrieve their personal belongings and to return school board learning resources as well.
Trustee Buck?
Thank you so much for that clarification from both of you. Considering it wasn't too long ago, I think we're less than 2 weeks since Tracy Valancourt, an expert in children's mental health, had stated we're on the cusp of catastrophe for this generation, and that she was essentially saying we needed kids back in school like yesterday, and that was a number of weeks ago now. Anytime that we can have our students and our staff together, I'm supportive of. So thank you so much for the spirit of this motion.
Thank you. Trustee Dees?
Thank you to the chair. So I do support this. I think we need to be clear, because I know when I've spoken to parents, and, you know, if we talk about coming back to school for a week, just to make it clear that it's, you know, strictly, you know, around the mental health, for them to connect before summer, for those things, right, that we're not trying to modify, you know, add more classes or anything like that. I think we just need to be clear in why we're doing it and what the purpose is and what the benefit is. Yeah, so I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just, to the director, is there anything that should be clarified for that, or does that make sense?
Through the chair, that clarity does make sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Galindo?
I don't have any comments, but I do support the motion.
Thank you. Trustee Johnstone?
Thank you. Through the chair, and I'm pleased to second this motion this evening. I think that this communication to the ministry would help the ministry to align their policies and recent direction in education. I think that what it does is it listens to science, so it listens to health experts, including Ontario's outgoing chief medical officer, who has strongly advocated for the return of students into the classroom. I think it centers and values the need to support our students' mental health and well-being, and that is certainly in line with this board as well as OPSBA's stance that we need to take a whole child approach and consider academics and alongside student mental health and well-being. And I think that it offers an opportunity for students to have safe outdoor activities while socially, physically distancing, but having the opportunity to be socially together. So I think that it meets a wide variety of needs and also echoes the voice of our parents and wider community members, and certainly our students who have expressed that they desperately want to return to school. And so for all those reasons, I do second this motion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Miller.
Thank you. And to the chair, I've already expressed where I stand on this position. I fully support this. If I could have it my way, we would be back in school on Monday. But obviously we know that there are steps that need to be done in order to do it safely. But I think after, well over a year of looking at report after report after report and talking about all of the statistics, it would be really nice to just, for once, be able to put our kids at the center and to be able to put their play and their joy and their friendships and their routines at the forefront. If we can have non-essential stores opening up in a few days at 15% capacity, where there's no contact tracing, if we can have all of those things, we can give our kids a few days to say goodbye to their friends in person, to see their teachers, to not have to mute and unmute themselves, to have recess outside. And those may or may not fit on a report, but I think we are at the stage where those things are actually quite priceless. They are past quantifying anymore. So I am in full support of this, and I hope that that our request is honored, because we know the HWDSB community best, and there have been lots of calls for this. So thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Tutts?
Thank you. And I struggle with this one. Typically, I would support something like this. I think it's well intentioned, and trust me, I think kids belong in the classroom too. Speaking from experience of having little kids on remote learning is not easy. I can just imagine how other parents are dealing with it. My concern kind of echoes along the lines of what Trustee Archer had kind of expressed a little bit. The timing is a bit of a concern for me, and I think if we're looking at just, 7 days or maybe a few days more than that, I don't know if that necessarily it is worth the risk, so to speak, considering we don't have people yet fully vaccinated. I'm not comfortable if something like this was to go through, putting our teachers at risk who have been carrying a huge burden up until this point for just a couple of days. Yes, it's important for the population to get back to normal, but I think if we're already in June, we're now going to go on to the second week of June soon. I think it just makes sense to continue on the path that we're at, and hopefully by the end of the summer we're at something that closely resembles normal. I mean, this government doesn't work particularly fast, so I would be shocked, no matter what type of timeline we put on our letter, that they'll even respond back quickly. So just bearing that out, and then also understanding that, yes, everyday numbers are dropping, but people are still losing their lives as well in hospitals. So I don't want to put anybody at risk if something like this was to go through. I don't think the timeline, works with what we're trying to do. So I think it just makes sense to just wait it out. So for those reasons, I'll be voting yes to this motion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Tutt. Student Trustee Hessler. Can I just get a check? Can everyone just double check that they're on mute, please? I think someone's walking. Except Student Trustee Hessler. You go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, and through the chair. Just sharing a little bit of kind of my thoughts on this, and just giving the student kind of perspective on this kind of topic. I feel like this is a very important thing to do, just because of the development of students and how much it's been impacted over the past couple of years of COVID. Just seeking a point of clarification, would this only be for elementary students?
Thank you for asking that. As a mover, it is for elementary students just because high school students are, I think, handing everything in by the 16th-ish and then have student success days that would normally be exam days. So logistically, there wouldn't be instructional class time to gather in at this time at the end of the school year. But I'll turn to the director just if you can talk about the timelines for secondary students.
So, through the chair, yes, I heard at the beginning of the motion that this would potentially be for elementary, because the impact, as you had mentioned, would be around our Student Success Day, which were typically our exam days. So that could impact students in terms of how they've been learning remotely and the preparation for those Student Success Days. I can pull up the calendar as a reference, but you are correct in what you've identified. Through the chair.
Thank you. And that was the intent because of the timeline differences. Student Trustee Hessler?
Yes. Thank you, and through the chair, for addressing my point of clarification. Just speaking a little bit further to it, just for the positive impacts on both a student and teacher kind of perspective. Just in terms of high school students, I know they won't be attending in person for this last week. However, I do know a lot of high school students that do have younger siblings. So in addition to their classes, they're also helping them. So this would also kind of help to give them that one little last week of freedom as well. Additionally, just from my perspective as a student in the classroom, and just observing teachers' mental health as well as ours, I feel like a lot of teachers this year, they've had classes and students really haven't been much more than kind of icons on a screen. So even from a teacher mental health kind of perspective, this would really kind of give them the opportunity to have that real connection between their students, which they usually have, and they really haven't, just because that's one thing that I've observed. I've been very grateful to have amazing teachers that have made online learning as and they made it feel as if it was in person. So I'm extremely grateful to them. And just from a student and teacher perspective, I really feel this would be very helpful in promoting a healthy sense of mental health. Thank you.
Thank you. And just then to close, I appreciate the different comments and questions. I think that they're really important and really good points for both sides. One thing that I'll share is that I did ask the director if there's an opportunity to reach out to our elementary teachers union to see if there might be support or if that would just trigger concerns, because at this time the last thing I would want to do is be disrespectful to our teachers and our staff and our educators. I think this would be an opportunity, if supported by the ministry, to do the wrap-up activities that are going to need to be planned for in person anyhow, which would include students picking up belongings, dropping off board resources, and so it also then allows, as we just heard, for students and teachers and students to connect and have that opportunity to reconnect socially, to focus on those relationships, and that can really set them up for success when we go back in September. And this is, of course, all contingent on if it were to be approved. But based on the information we've received from public health, they certainly do feel that at this time it is safe for students to go back to school. And if we look at how we fared through contact tracing and all of our protocols that we've already established in our schools. Back in March, when numbers were much higher, we had 10 outbreaks where there's one person to one person spread in schools. And I don't minimize the seriousness of COVID or the impacts of COVID, but I think, as was highlighted, our mental health experts are saying that there are other significant consequences of staying in remote, and this could help mitigate those. So thanks for the conversation around this. I'll go to the motion to write a letter to the ministry to request that our elementary students could return in person at HWDSB, and of course in collaboration with public health, for the last 5 to 7 days of school. Is anyone opposed?
Trustee Tutt is opposed.
Thank you, Trustee Tutt.
Trustee Archer?
Thank you, Trustee Archer. Okay, the motion passes. At this time, we'll move along to item 11, oral reports from liaison committees. For item A, the City School Board Liaison Committee has not met. I will be reaching out to the Mayor's office to see if we can start to reschedule these meetings ideally in September, as I know there are a number of items that it would be helpful to start discussing as a committee. For item B, I'll turn that to Trustee Galindo.
Thank you. Through the Chair, there is a meeting on June 10th at 7 p.m. for the Home and School Association. They are also having their elections that day, and up for consideration for the elections would be the executive positions of President, First Vice President, Second Vice President, Secretary, Treasurer, and anyone who is interested in nominating themselves may contact the organization. With that, there's also the Ontario Federation of Home and School Association. Their Board of Director and Executive meeting is scheduled for June 12th. And that is all the updates I have for this month. Thank you.
Thank you. And if it's okay, I'll go through the oral reports and then turn to trustees to see if there are questions for any of them. The item C is the Hamilton Foundation for Student Success. Trustee Buck.
Thank you very much, Chair Janko. Just a few things to note. Just for trustees' awareness, since October of last year, so October 2020, up until May 28th of this year, the Hamilton Foundation for Student Success supported 267 HWDSB students with student support grants, totaling over $52,000. So we were able to help through the foundation 267 of our own students, which is a great number to hear, especially given all the trials and difficulties of the past year. As well, to better align with HWDSB's board annual plan and the board's equity action plan, foundation staff have been asked to explore program opportunities related to equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives within HWDSB. And finally, the foundation has received a grant from the Hamilton Community Foundation's Pandemic Response Fund in the amount of $100,000. This very generous grant will be used to support the critical needs of HWDSB students, and the Foundation will be working with the board to determine the most worthwhile priorities to focus these funds on. We are so grateful to the Hamilton Community Foundation for this tremendous investment in well-being of our students. And with that, no further updates.
Thank you, Trustee Buck. And our item D is our Ontario Public School Boards Association. And as I mentioned, I'll go back and see if there are any questions about any of the items when we're done all four. Trustee Johnstone?
Thank you. Through the chair. With regards to the OPSBA update, I'll just start by reminding trustees that the OPSBA annual general meeting is taking place this Saturday via Zoom. The keynote speaker is Kika Ojo-Thompson, and there's no fees this year, so trustees can simply log in. If you need additional details, please do not hesitate to contact me. With regard to COVID-19 update on Wednesday, Premier Ford and Minister Lecce, as well as Health Minister Elliott, announced that students across Ontario would not be returning to in-person learning this school year. OPSBA released a statement from President Kathy Abraham stating that we are very disappointed with the government's decision today to go against the advice of Ontario public health officials and the recommendation of school boards about the importance of reopening our schools. The Premier publicly asked for consensus from the public health and education stakeholders and received consensus for which he asked, and then apparently chose further opening of the economy over students. Included in this announcement was a surprise request from the Premier that school boards invite graduating students in elementary schools by class and secondary schools by homeroom quadmester class to return to school in June for a short outdoor celebration where physically distancing is possible. President Abraham's statement spoke to this as well, stating that school boards are concerned about the apparent contradiction between the decision to close schools and the directive from the Premier to hold in-person graduations. Our members have already been doing all that they can to ensure that we are able to recognize the many students who will be graduating this year and will continue to do our best to support our students and staff throughout these challenging times. With regards to legislation, Bill 288, Building Opportunities in Skilled Trades Act 2021. This legislation was introduced May 6th and proposed amendments including Skilled Trades Ontario, a new Crown agency to replace the Ontario College of Trades, and to streamline apprenticeship training. OPSBA's work teams proposed a submission to the Standing Committee in the Finance Economic Affairs earlier this week and outlined our support for the continuation expansion of experiential learning opportunities for students in our schools. And it received royal assent on June 3rd. Bill 276, Supporting the Recovery and Competitiveness Act 2020-21. This legislation was introduced on April 15th by the Associate Minister of Small Business and Red Tape Reduction. The bill contains changes to 28 acts, including the Education Act, with regards to demonstration schools. And just so trustees know, demonstration schools are schools for deafblind and deafblind students. There are 3 English demonstration schools in the province of Ontario, and I believe that they take up to 40 students each. They tend to be residential schools. OPSBA Policy Development Work Team did provide a written submission just highlighting concerns around the requirement for in-person learning or residential stays only, and ask the government to expand upon access to the schools so that students would not have, can be expanded to those who only wanted to participate by just for the day, not have them stay overnight. Bill 251, Combating Human Trafficking Act 2021. This legislation was introduced on February 22nd by the Solicitor General, and it has received a royal assent as of June 3rd. I know I've brought in multiple updates on that bill to trustees. Bill C5, an act to amend the Bills of Exchange Act, which also amends the or has an impact on the Canadian Labour Code. So this is federal legislation that was introduced September 29th, 2020, and it has led to the creation of a new national holiday for Truth and Reconciliation, which is to be observed September 30th. It passed third reading on May 28th and received royal assent on June 3rd. So what that does is it does create a new federal holiday for federal employees to recognize, it's a day to recognize Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th. That, Madam Chair, completes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. So to trustees and student trustees, are there any questions to any of the oral reports that we've just heard? You can unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. Hearing none, we'll move to item 12, which is adjournment, and move to standing committee. I'll have that moved by Trustee Archer, seconded by Trustee Beef. Is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, we'll move into standing committee, and I will turn things over to Vice Chair Galindo.
Thank you, Chair Danko. Hi, everyone. This is Trustee Galindo. I'm calling this standing committee to order. It is Monday, June 7th. It is 1 minute to 9 o'clock. I'll commence this meeting with a roll call. So we have myself, Trustee Galindo. Do we have Trustee Archer?
Present.
Do we have Trustee Bingham?
Present.
Do we have Trustee Buck?
Present.
Do we have Trustee Danko?
Present.
Trustee Deeth?
Present.
Trustee Johnstone?
Left.
I'm present. Thank you.
Thank you. And we do have regrets from Trustee Mulholland. Do we have Trustee Miller?
Present. Thank you.
Do we have Trustee Tutt?
Present.
And do we have Student Trustee Hessler?
Present.
We do have regrets from Student Trustee Zakar and Segawana Galagat.Zagi. We will be following the same meeting norms and expectations as our earlier board meeting. I'll look to trustees to approve the agenda. Can I get Trustee Danko to move that? And perhaps I'll get Trustee Deeth to second the approval of the agenda. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, is anyone voting against approval of the agenda? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest, noting that I did not receive any in writing ahead of this meeting?
Jason Rizza.
Joined.
And perhaps we'll get Trustee Deeth to second the approval of the agenda. So just remind folks who are joining to place themselves on mute, please. Thank you. Not hearing any declarations of conflict of interest, at this point I'll turn to reports from staff, starting with our Safe Schools update on mapping out community supports. I'll turn to Director Figueredo to start us off.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll pass to Superintendent Sharon Stefanian, who's overseeing this report. And just so trustees are aware, the mapping out of community supports, this is our final monitoring report. We've provided updates along the way after we terminated the Police Liaison Officer program. So this is a culmination of the work that was led by the team. I want to thank Sally Langdon, our Manager of Research, Yohana Tete, Equity and Human Rights Officer, Jason Rizza, our Principal of Safe Schools, and last but not least, Sharon Stefanian, our Superintendent of Equity and Wellbeing, but our Superintendent now of our Safe Schools Action Plan and Wellbeing, and I'll pass it to her. Trustees did also receive a slide deck late this afternoon, a series of 3. That's a summary of this, so I'll pass to Sharon.
Thank you, Director Figueredo. And I'm just doing a sound check through the chair. Can you hear me okay?
You sound clear. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So as the Director indicated, I am pleased this evening to be presenting a report to trustees, the final report with respect to safe schools and mapping out community support. Trustees should have the slide deck available to them. I will reference these slides as well as the specific page numbers in the report. And I would like to thank this evening, we have Sally Landon, our Manager of Research and Analytics, Johanna Otite, our Equity and Human Rights Officer, and Jason Rizza, Principal of Safe Schools, joining us for this report. On slide number 2, I would just like to begin by showing thanks and appreciation for the working group who came together to plan the consultations that took place with the community and also who worked with the recommendations that came forward from the community that are included in the report this evening. Trustees will recall that the working group is a combination of members from our board, First Nation Métis Inuit Advisory Committee, our Human Rights and Equity Advisory Committee, and their work was supported by staff. We had a combination of parents, guardians, caregivers, community partners, as well as strong student voice at the table with respect to the working group, and they spent considerable time giving of their gifts and their talent, and so we do want to express appreciation to them. Page 5-2 in the report does include the names of some of the members. Unfortunately, we didn't have consent from all of the members to include their names in the report at publication time, but do want to extend appreciation to them. On slide number 3, also would like to extend sincere appreciation to all of the individuals who came out and engaged in the consultation sessions. So in your report on page 5-3, you will see a detailed list of the consultations that were held, as well as the dates in which they were held. And you can see in your report this evening, as well as on the slide, we wanted to ensure that we had strong student voice represented at the table, as well as outreach to our board advisory committees, legislative committees, and community partners. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Dr. Siobhan Niles and Jordan Carrier, who were involved in the facilitation of the consultation sessions with our community. So moving on to slide number 4, and as the Director indicated, we have been providing trustees with monitoring reports along the way. So I won't take a lot of time on this slide. As the Director has indicated, in June of 2020, the trustees voted to terminate the Police Liaison program. Since that time, the role of police in schools has been limited to that is required from the perspective of Safe Schools Act and legislation, and really are contained to those areas of emergency response, including lockdown, bomb threat, hold and secure, and evacuation type situations. Through the previous Police Liaison program, there were different types of presentations, which are included in your package in Appendix E, that were provided through the Police Liaison program. So the focus of the work of the working group and the consultation was to look at how, as we move forward, can we consider the selection and the determination of groups and organizations to provide these presentations within schools? We know that in doing that work, it was important to consider how that will happen in a way that is safe and supportive and inclusive to all of our students, particularly considering the needs of our Indigenous students, Black, racialized students receiving special education support, and our students who identify as Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+. The end result is this evening we will be sharing with trustees the development of guidelines to select the partners or the groups and organizations to support these presentations. And I've highlighted guidelines because you may recall that in our update presentations, we often spoke about criteria. And one of the pieces of feedback that we received from the community very loud and clear that the language of criteria or the approach of criteria was another form of policing, and another way in which barriers could be created for community partners who are doing this authentic work in the community to engage in schools. So rather, the preference of the community was to have a development of guidelines which would support the selection of partners to deliver presentations in schools. So you'll see that reflected throughout. Again, by way of review, and we spoke previously about the literature review, we have provided trustees this evening with the full literature review in your package, beginning on Appendix A. So trustees certainly have the opportunity to work through the full literature review that was completed by Research and Analytics. What did we learn from the literature review? That both within Canada and the United States, there are numerous suggestions for how police liaison programs could be improved, and also strong consideration was urged to replace the programs with other types of support. So we had talked about this previously. I just referenced this piece back for our trustees this evening. Moving on to slide number 6, which is page 5-27 in your report. This is the section around shared communication that was shared from the community. Again, this was highlighted in a previous monitoring report for trustees. This evening, we did want to provide trustees with a summary of all of the communication that was received. I will highlight for trustees that through the process, we made the decision not to gather additional data specifically on the police liaison program because we did not want to re-victimize those who were harmed by the program. And in a moment, I'll speak to what we heard from the community with respect to harm that was experienced. We know that harm was experienced. As a result, the program was terminated. We need to give attention to how it is that we can move forward with a new approach to selecting organizations for presentations, and not to go back and potentially cause harm again. So on slide number 7, I'll highlight what was a strong message that came from the work within the community. And I'll reference trustees to pages 5-28 and 5-29 in the report, or Appendix C. Throughout the consultation, one of the strong messages that came back from our students and community was that the police liaison program caused harm for students. And for some students, they are still feeling the impact of the program and the harm today. It is still something that is with our students. And so we want to ensure that we are being clear with our community when we say that we acknowledge and apologize for the harm that was caused by the program, specifically to our Indigenous, our Black, racialized, Two-Spirit, and LGBTQI+, and students who are accessing special education supports and services. Want to be clear that the program has been terminated and the program will not be replaced. Through the consultation process, we are very appreciative of those who have come forward to share their stories and those who have put forth requests for change. We're committed to working alongside our students in our community and those who were impacted to respond to the requests for actions as we endeavor to repair the harm that was caused. So I draw trustees' attention to Appendix C because Appendix C highlights, and again, that's pages 528 and 529 in your report. That section of the report highlights for trustees the communication that was received from students and the communication that was received from the community and what requests were made to HWDSB with respect to repairing the harm. In the far right-hand column, we have identified the actions that have been taken to date in response to the requested action, and also the actions that will be taken if they haven't been undertaken already. Some of the actions align with and will be undertaken as part of our Safe Schools Action Plan, while others as part of our Equity Action Plan or our Employment Equity Strategy. Again, highlight that for trustees this evening because that is one small step in repairing the harm that was caused by the police liaison program. The other piece that I will highlight this evening is that within the report, we may have individual students who would like to report the harm that they experienced, and we certainly encourage students to do that. They can reach out directly to our Human Rights Office at humanrights, one word, at HWDSB.on.ca. Moving on to slide number 8, and again, this is one that trustees have seen before. It really is just a high-level overview representation of the work that we undertook, which again, looking at the input and gathering voice from a variety of audiences to generate ultimately guidelines, including how to do this work safely, and then look at how we can then reach out to partners to deliver programs in our school. So I'm on slide number 9, and I'm going to talk very high level about the consultation findings, and they are detailed for trustees within the report. Beginning on page 5-4, you will see the themes that emerged from the work, and also within the report in Appendix D, you will also see more details on each of the themes that have emerged. At very high level for trustees, and I am on slide number 10, which is page 5-4 within your report, 5-4 and 5-5. So what did we hear? We heard, again, reinforcing the element of a need for HWDSB to rebuild trust within the community. Again, the messaging around the program causing harm and the need for HWDSB to hold ourselves accountable. There were concerns that as we were approaching the creation of protocols and criteria, as I said, that could become a new form of policing. That if we were rigid in our approach, that could create barriers. Ultimately, when there is a list of vetted speakers, that should be made transparent and publicly available. It should also be something that is revisited on a regular basis, and the approach should be one that applies to all speakers and organizations for consistency and for transparency. We also heard about the Continuum of Care framework for educational partnerships. Really appreciated the deep thinking and feedback that came through the consultations. And one of the strong messages was that as we consider educational programming partnerships and presenters coming into our classroom, we need to be thinking about how we, as educators and as a system, care for our students before, during, and after each presentation, and entering into each partnership or each opportunity for a presentation with a lens around what does this say in terms of caring for the students who are going to be the recipient of this learning, and planning with intentionality around how we create the safe entrance and the safe exit and ensure that there is safety built in as part of the continuum. Connected to that, very loud and clear, absolutely need to engage student voice in the process. Students who are going to be receiving presentations need to be part of the process along the way, whether it's a classroom-based presentation decision that's being made or it's the selection from the vetted list of presenters around learning that happens in the classroom. Absolutely needs to be embedded throughout. There were also some high-level themes that emerged with respect to representation. Again, these are themes that we've heard in other equity work that we have undertaken. so important for our students to see themselves represented in those who are in front of them delivering presentations, those who have the same lived experiences, those who share their perspective. Important for us as a board to really invest in those who are already doing the work at a grassroots level within the community. There are individuals, there are organizations, there is expertise within our system from the perspective of students and staff. So really thinking about who are those who are authentically doing the work, and not just saying the language, but actually demonstrating through action. Ensuring that the presentations align with our commitments around AR, AO, and anti-colonial work. Highlighted by the community is when we think about knowledge, experience, and education, those things are not neutral and they're not the same. So as we're entering into thinking about who would be providing presentations, recognize that they're not all the same, and we need to consider lived experience within the context of that work. Slide number 13, I've highlighted this a little bit again, page 5.4 and 5.5 in the report, heard loud and clear the importance of student voice. That right now when it comes to presentations, students don't feel that they're heard, they don't feel that there is a voice. Many indicated that they would like to be part of a process for the determination of who it is that comes into the classroom, that the learning when it happens in the classroom can't be a one-off, one-day presentation, but needs to be connected to broader learning within the context of the curriculum. Students really want to know why this learning at this time and how does it fit with what's happening in the classroom, and that we need to have an intentional feedback process to provide the speakers and the organizations with feedback from the perspective of students. So all of the theme information came together for the development of guidelines, and again, appreciation to the working group for their work in consolidating and putting the guidelines together that trustees see this evening, beginning on page 5-5. So hopefully what you will see is that these guidelines align with what we heard from the community in terms of themes. So the guidelines will prioritize lived experience and knowledge relative to what's being presented, with intention given to students seeing themselves and being able to relate to those who are delivering the presentation in the classroom. Deep understanding of AR and AO and anti-colonial frameworks, and really ensuring that we're amplifying opportunity for those who are authentically doing the work. The ability to consider the context, culture, and demographics of the classroom and contextualize the presentation for the specific audience. What learning may look like in a grade 8 classroom may look very different depending upon the topic in a grade 12 classroom. So again, something that was identified. Moving on to slide number 15. A deep understanding that safety looks different for different students, and there needs to be that intentional planning before, during, and after, and no surprises. Valuing our local and territorial perspectives and lived experiences in terms of presentations, and also thinking about how staff or students can be part of delivering presentations. Center accessibility in the presentation, and understanding that having a one-size-fits-all framework doesn't lead to deep learning. It can't be a one-off, but needs to be connected deeply with what's happening in the classroom. Slide number 16. Again, the importance of the authentic representation, diversity of people and perspectives. Consider the school-to-prison pipeline and understand that some speakers might have contact with the law. So how does the work of the guidelines fit in with our policy and our approach around volunteers within the classroom, and the ability to connect with the student body. Also extremely, extremely important was the message that this is a living document. This is not meant to be static. It's not meant to be forever, but to be updated in order to ensure that the guidelines are meeting needs of students in the classroom, that they're not contributing to policing, not limiting the involvement of grassroots organizations or being too laborious on our partners. In addition, when engaging members of the Indigenous community, we need to look at an ethical framework for engaging within the Indigenous community, as well as the other guidelines that have been developed. So on to slide 17, just to highlight for trustees, we are now on page 5-6 in the report, and speaking a little bit to implementation. So implementation we see as a multi-tiered approach. So while we were reaching out and we were looking at a process specifically for the selection of partners for programs that were previously provided by the Police Liaison program, I think what trustees can see this evening is that the work that has been done by the community certainly reaches far beyond that and has the ability to influence how we deliver select partners for presentations in our schools and in our classrooms. So we're looking at implementation being divided up in a two-tier approach. So the first tier would be those presentations which we would expect would be non-triggering type topics. They may be school or classroom presentations, which would follow the guidelines, or they may be system determined presentations, which would also follow the guidelines. But at the system level, we would also have in place a system committee who would be involved in the selection of the partners to provide the program. Tier 2 presentations would be those that are on potentially triggering topics. And where there is the potential for there to be a triggering topic, whether it's a presentation that's being decided on at the school classroom level or within the system, it will need to follow guidelines, and there will need to be a multi-perspective committee that comes together to make a decision with respect to the presentation, the organization, or the individual who would be presenting. So in terms of next steps, we see the work happening over 3 stages. So the first stage, and again, this is page 5-6 and 5-7 in your report. The first stage would see us working through the application of the guidelines beginning in September, specifically for the programs that are included in Appendix E. And those are the ones that were previously provided by the Police Liaison program. An opportunity to work through the process, to learn about the application of the guidelines, as well as feedback process, to then inform the work stage 2. And stage 2 would be looking at the tier 1 or the non-triggering presentations in schools and the system procedure supports to go with that. And stage 3 would be looking at the supports for the programs that have potentially triggering content. So on slide number 19, again, page 5-7 of the report, I'll just highlight this for a moment because this would be the first phase of the work and the work that connects to the Appendix E topics. We will be establishing a student-parent community vetting review table. You can see the composition of the table included on slide number 19, which includes strong student voice from our existing advisory tables, from Student Senate, involvement of representatives from the Community Mapping Working Group, and that this process would be co-chaired by a student, and a parent or a community member and staff would be present to support and to assist. Stage 1 will also see the development of a simple application form aligning with the guidelines. Submissions may be made online, through paper, or through oral submission, again, trying to make the process as barrier-free as possible. We'll be creating a feedback tool for students to use in order to provide feedback after the presentations. And also, as part of stage 1, we're gathering feedback around the process to inform next steps. Again, trying to live true to the recommendation that came forward that this needs to be a living process that is revisited. And then I just share with trustees on page 5-7 the timelines for stage 2 and timelines for stage 3, which will take us to January of 2023. And that concludes the presentation this evening, and I'm happy to answer trustee questions.
Thank you. I appreciate the thorough presentation. At this point, I will turn to trustees for questions through roll call, and I'll be doing that in alphabetical order. So let's start with Trustee Archer. Do you have any questions about the presentation and report?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Bigham, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, but that's very thorough. At this point, I'm really quite pleased with the way things are, with what we're seeing and reading, and especially the first steps. I'm looking forward to seeing how those begin. Anyways, thank you to staff, and thank you to all in the community who were able to come forward and give us the information that they have.
Thank you. I'll now turn to Trustee Buck. Do you have any questions? I'm not too sure if you're on mute there, Trustee Buck. So I'm not hearing Trustee Buck. Perhaps we'll go to Trustee Danko in the meantime.
Thank you. Just a comment. Thank you to staff for bringing this forward and for the work that's gone into this. I appreciate the different ways that student voice is being incorporated that can really make things more relevant. And I appreciate on the student voice slides the importance of connections between the presentations and curriculum and growth. So I'm hopeful that this will actually lead to more impactful opportunities for presenters in our system. Also appreciate hearing about the importance of making sure that the application is simple, that we're recognizing different types of knowledge. It doesn't necessarily need to be formal education that's recognized. So I appreciated that. I had one question, but I can't seem to find the slide now, and I apologize. I can certainly just ask it offline, but thank you again for the report.
I could always come back to you as well, Trustee Danko, if you'd like, when I come back to Trustee Buck. We'll play it by ear. Trustee D?
Thank you. And I have a couple of questions. I was just trying to go back through it to find it. I'm not sure what page it's on. But when we talked about, I think it was here, presentations, workshop topics. So I want to ask, I mean, those are all great. I'm just wondering, I think my first question is, are these the topics that have sort of come up that are or sort of the majority of what the police were covering with conversations when they were in? I'm asking because the only thing I don't see there is sort of gang-related or anything to do with gangs. So I'm just wondering where that list is coming from.
So I'll turn to the superintendent, perhaps.
Yes, thank you to the trustee for the question. Through the chair, yes, the list of topics that the trustees see in Appendix E, which is on page 5-33, came through our administrators when we requested a list from them in terms of the presentations that they were accessing. This is the list that was provided.
Trustee D?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we got any feedback from the police in sort of the issues that they were addressing most at the school. I think there is something in here, but I'm just wondering, just to make sure that we are not missing any topics.
Superintendent?
So through the chair, thank you for the question. We didn't reach out specifically to request that of the police. We relied on the information that we gathered from the administrators in terms of what their outreach was. I suspect that if the trustee has heard that there were presentations with respect to gangs, it may have been captured or part of another presentation area. Certainly what you see in Appendix B is a list of topics, but we will be teasing out content for those areas as we look towards the selection of individuals or groups or partners who can provide those presentations as we go forward.
Trustee?
Thank you. Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. So it's not that I've heard of a presentation in regards to gang or gang affiliations or about gang affiliations, but I'm assuming part of but what I have heard is that when police are coming into the schools, that's one of the issues they're dealing with. So I'm just wondering if we're going to address it through a presentation.
Superintendent?
Oh, thank you. So through the chair, my apologies. I misunderstood what the trustee's question was. So as I had mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, our work with the Hamilton Police Services is focused on from the perspective of legislation and the Safe Schools Act, where we have mandatory reporting. That is when we will engage and have outreach with Hamilton Police Services, not for presentations. For presentations, we will be working with other partners within the community. So if a principal identified that there was concern around gang-related activity, we would look at following our guidelines that have been developed and looking to a community organization that is doing work connected to gang prevention and look to see who may be able to come in to provide that support and that learning.
Thank you. And through the chair, so another question is in regards to weapons. So we've heard or we've seen with expulsions, sometimes the students expelled for having a weapon, and then what's come about is that they had the weapon, or so they're telling us, is that it was for safety. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be follow-up around that, because it feels like we expel the student, which, it is, consequences, and absolutely I don't have an issue with that, but is that are we getting then, if we're hearing something like that, if there's concern that they're bringing a weapon to school because they're concerned about their safety, how do we address that with the student?
Superintendent?
So thank you to the trustee for the question. I think the trustee is asking a bit more of a global question that focuses on our approach to safe schools and supports connected to suspension and expulsion that would go beyond, certainly beyond presentations. And as the trustee has indicated, there are consequences for having a weapon at school. Certainly part of our work is, while there are suspensions and expulsions, there also is the importance of looking at learning and working with a young person and family around why they're bringing the weapon, how might we be able to address if there is a concern about going home, how can we work to help support and address what that concern may be, and what is the specific learning need that student has. But certainly each case is unique, and we do look at how we can wrap supports around a student who may be suspended or may be expelled, because it certainly is about learning and future changed behavior.
Trustee Dees?
Thank you. And I think how it ties into with the police, because, we're reading where some students, did feel better felt safer with a police presence, which I would assume ties into, not all of them that don't feel safe are bringing weapons in, but I think just tying into that, I guess just making sure that if the police aren't there to address that, is that, how are we making sure that we're, they're able to, going back to, I guess, students feeling safe, that they're able to report an incident. I think I read that they were talking to police about some of these things. So I guess just making sure, it's more of a comment. I don't expect an answer on this, but just making sure that, we're addressing this and dealing with it in a new way other than just calling the police or expelling if there's a weapon, that we're digging down more into it. So my other question is in regards to speaker lists, and I want to say that having been involved with school councils for probably close to 20 years, and it's always been with school councils, when they bring in speakers to address some of these, through either, a pro-grant or whatever it is that in the past, when we've tried to bring in a speaker, there hasn't been anything that tells us, a speaker that's been vetted and or if they've been in one of our schools, kind of what the rating recommendations. So I'm glad to see we're going to have a vetted speaker list. So I'm just wondering, with this vetted speaker list, where's that going to be posted?
Superintendent?
Through the chair, thank you to the trustee for the question. Extremely important for us in this process to be transparent. So it would be posted on our website and available to our schools.
That's good to hear. And I'm just wondering, with that, I know you mentioned student voice, which is, again, fantastic, and student feedback. Is there going to be an opportunity, and I think you mentioned there's going to be an opportunity for feedback right after a presentation by students? Is it sort of going to be a rating system, or have we not kind of worked that out yet, just so it breaks down, not just good or bad, but, ties into some different things, like, some of the things, I guess, that we need to flush out. But, did it tie into, your learning? Did you walk away from it with something? Was the presenter engaging? Those types of questions that I think will help for when either whether it's a classroom or a school council or looking at bringing in a speaker, that kind of information can really help them determine if that's a speaker that's suitable for that classroom. So my question would be, are we going to have sort of that more in-depth feedback from students?
Superintendent?
Yes, and through the chair, absolutely. Part of the work in stage one of the process is going to be looking at the development of the tools and the resources that will all be developed in alignment with the guidelines that have been created.
Trustee?
Okay. Yeah, so, that's really good to hear because, like I said, I know it's been frustrating for school councils in the past where you bring in a speaker and you think they're good and then, it doesn't land or it doesn't tie in as well or it just doesn't, sit with students or it doesn't engage students is the other thing. So glad to see this and thank you for this work on this and looking forward to seeing where this develops. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Deep. I'll now turn to Trustee Johnstone. Do you have any questions or comments?
I do, thank you. I think first off, I want to start by thanking staff as well as the working group who really, all of the work that has gone into this report and coming to this place. With regards to mapping out community support. I also want to thank Superintendent Stefanian for beginning the conversation tonight by acknowledging the harm that was done by the police liaison program and really spending significant time tonight by highlighting those experiences to trustees and in highlighting the local voice. I think that was very important, and I can only speak for myself, but I also want to share in that apology that that it's an apology that needs to be made on behalf of the board, but also myself as a decision maker, I also want to echo that apology. I think one of the things that came to mind as I was reading through this report, and especially where the literature review was concerned, and a large portion of the literature review focused on TDSB's report of their SRO program, which was the equivalent of our PLO program. And TDSB canceled their SRO program in 2017. And when I look at the timeline, our timeline, it was the fall of 2018, I believe, that, and I could have the timeline not exactly right here, but my understanding is that's when HCCI first conducted a report, and it was handed in internally, so to staff requesting, I believe that's the first time that there was a request for us to consider canceling the SRO or the PLO program here at HWDSB. And when I look at our timeline, we move through to the spring of 2019 where we hire our equity officer, but it takes us up to last spring where there is finally a motion to cancel our PLO program, and that was community-driven. And I think that we need to look at, because this report is about focusing on a community engagement process, we really need to look at what happened through our community engagement process, and how we can learn through this process, how we can learn from it. Some of the questions that I have, and I'll state that the work that's been done and the work that I see in this report is excellent, but it should have been done years ago. And I know that staff, trustees, myself included, there is good intentions, but I think that part of this process needs to be a reflection of looking at how white privilege truly impacted the decision-making process. And I think that's part of where we need to go if we are to ensure that going forward that we're not having to make these public apologies, that we're preventing harm as soon as it comes on the radar, that we are taking urgent and immediate action. I think that as I guess what I'm hoping to see is how we can learn from our fellow boards more quickly. We've cited the literature review and citing TDSB's report and SRO. Again, that was passed in 2017. I know I read that out as part of my argument in support of ending the PLO program last spring. So I think that, I guess my questions are, how can we learn from fellow boards as they pass policies, and where I think sometimes we like to think that we're different, that our circumstances in Hamilton are different from Toronto, different from Peel, different from York. And I think we need to instead be looking at how we learn from our fellow communities and how we're contributing to this, I guess, collective learning and knowing. I think we need to ask ourselves how we understand urgency. And that's where I believe white privilege came into play in terms of our decision-making process, and then certainly impacting my role as a decision-maker. And I think that what I most want to ask is, what measures are we introducing to ensure that the community engagement process going forward seeks to center our community's voices as they're received. So I'm not sure if those questions are fully clear, but those are the three questions that I have: is how we learn from fellow boards, how we understand urgency as community voices coming forward, and what different measures we're introducing in order to better improve upon the community engagement process as it relates to this, to our Safe Schools plan, but also, I guess, more broadly as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnston. I will ask trustees to be mindful of the time they're taking with speaking. I will turn it to staff to see if they have a response with perhaps some of the comments or questions that were raised. Otherwise, I can move to the following trustee.
So through the chair, I will just highlight for the trustee and thank you for the comments and the questions. I think that whenever we are engaging in or embarking on work that is equity work, we need to always be very much aware of our privilege, very much aware of our power, very much aware of the lens and the perspective that we hold and how that lens and that perspective impact what it is that we're seeing and what it is that we're viewing. And I certainly think in a few moments, trustees will have an opportunity to hear the update on our Equity Action Plan. I think the creation of an Equity Action Plan, which included within it the need to look at partners and the need to look at relationships through that critical eye of ARAO, as well as decolonializing, being extremely important as part of the process. And I think that to the trustees' comment, being aware of when something emerges as urgent within the community, that may shift priorities within the plan and move something into an earlier time frame. But I do think that the engagement piece is extremely important, and what trustees will see in this work as well as in the forthcoming work around safe schools, we have heard from our community that we need to engage differently, and we are looking at how we can build structures to ensure that we are hearing the voices that we need to hear, and those are the voices that have been historically or currently oppressed and marginalized by education systems.
Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Johnston, I think you had one last question, but make it super quick.
I will, and I'll leave the comment that I'm hoping that we can further address how we understand urgency in these matters going forward. My other question does have to do with I think that one other item that I was looking to see in this report, we still have police coming into our schools, and although the motion did focus on a replacement or alternative programming, if I recall the discussion correctly back last spring, there was a wide discussion that police do still come into our schools during emergency matters, and I was hoping as well to see a discussion around how that occurs, or what, I guess, if there's been any further discussion with Hamilton Police around setting up, I guess, the process for that, and ensuring that, while I realize a lot of it's guided by the province, we also need to ensure that our educators and our school administrators are informed about the process, so that they are protecting our students' rights. And as that was an item that came forward as well during that discussion. So will that be part of the next step beyond looking at what partners we bring into schools, but also examining when police have to come into our schools?
Superintendent? sure if you're muted there, Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Galindo. I was on mute. My apologies. So, yes, thank you to the trustee for the question. Information was prepared and shared with all of our school administrators at the start of the school year. The information that was prepared clarified for our administrators when, under legislation, they are required to do mandatory reporting to police. Under which conditions would police be invited into the school. So, for example, very concretely, if they are planning for evacuation procedures that are connected to bomb threats or to lockdowns, they have been given specific guidance in terms of trying to do as much of that planning as they possibly can outside of the school day when students are not in the building. And we have an approach in which information is shared with students as well as with families in advance of any of those drills happening, so that there is an awareness that there will be police in the building and the reason that the police will be present in the building. Staff also created communication tools that schools can use with families. If families are wondering about a connection in with the police, it's not our role or our place to be doing that. So we have provided information for families around the role of police within HWDSB schools so that that information is available and clear.
Thank you, Superintendent. At this point, I will be moving on to Trustee Miller. Trustee Miller, do you have any comments or questions?
Just a brief comment. I think thank you so much to staff for the vision that's in this report. I think the emphasis on community partners, the emphasis on student consultation, student engagement, and feedback is going to be the engine of a lot of this work. It's where we're going to be checking whether or not our intent is lining up with the impact. So it's, this is very hard work. It is a very long time coming, but I'm thankful that we have a team that is taking such care to really ask the difficult questions right now, acknowledge the harm, acknowledge the work of community partners who communicated to us that this program was not serving its intent, and also, now we can go ahead and go forward, and we can ideally create a program that is our own and that addresses our students' needs and serves our greater community. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. I'll turn to Trustee Tutt. Do you have any questions or comments?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to our student trustee, Hessler. Do you have any questions?
Since you went through the chair, I do have just two questions. My first question, just on page 5-3 under the subheading Process and Outcomes, when we're looking at all of the student bodies that were consulted, I was just wondering what the makeup of these bodies were, just because I'm not seeing just like a lot about how many students participated in each, or any of that kind of information. I feel like there is a lot of diversity amongst the student groups that were consulted on this. I'm just not sure if it's just maybe like 200 students spread out throughout all these groups that are trying to speak for the 50,000 at the HWDSB.
Superintendent?
Sorry, the mute button. So through the chair, thank you to the student trustee for the question. We certainly can provide a more detailed breakdown within the director's report to the trustees. I can share that overall globally we had approximately 100 students who participated in the focus group consultation session.
Thank you. Student trustee Hessler?
Yeah, thank you, and through the chair for the response. I feel we may be, I think, able to gather a little more student data, just because I feel like the kind of students who participate in these groups, they're very academically oriented, they're very forward-thinking people, just to put themselves out there and have that confidence, whereas there's a lot of other students that don't have that confidence, but their opinions are equally valid. I think maybe perhaps posing a thought exchange as well might be a good idea, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Superintendent?
Thank you to the student trustee for the question. Agree completely. Always more student voice is better. More perspectives are better. We know that as we look to implementing the guidelines, information that came back through the working group was that they are a starting point, and it's important to go back and to revisit. And so as we look towards the work that will happen during the first stage, and we are seeking feedback, we have also been considering how we may be able to reach out to the broader community and broader student community, and certainly a thought exchange is one potential. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Trustee Hessler. Any follow-up questions?
No follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hessler. Trustees, I do need a motion to extend by 30 minutes. Perhaps I'll get Trustee Johnstone to move that and Trustee Dees to second it, if that's okay. Is anyone against? Motion has passed unanimously. Thank you. I'll just go back to Trustee Buck. I believe you're still on the call. Did you have any questions or comments?
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Galindo. My apologies for missing earlier. I don't have anything that hasn't already been said, so thank you very much to my colleagues for their fulsome discussion about tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Trustee Buck. I'll add myself to the speakers list as well. Looking at stage one of the implementation process, could staff speak to the process for how we will be evaluating and assessing partnerships once they've been established and once programming is being delivered?
So through the chair, and I'm just going to restate your question because you were cutting out. I think your question, Chair Galindo, was with respect to how we will be evaluating the presentation?
Correct. Once programming begins, how will we be evaluating those partnerships?
Okay, thank you. So that will be part of the work that we will be undertaking in terms of stage one. So the programs will be selected and evaluated against the guidelines that were created through the process, the community-based process that we walked through this evening. The development of the tools and the resources and the implementation of those tools and resources will all be part of the work that happens during stage one of implementation.
Perfect. Thank you for that response. And I just want to echo the comments of my colleagues. I appreciate the work that's been done on this file over the last few months, particularly to our Sharon Spanian, Jason Riza, Yahona Otite, and Sally Landon. I appreciate the work that the entire team is doing. And, of course, thank you to the students, parents, and community members who have been participating and sharing their thinking to inform this approach. I really appreciate the work that's being done locally, and what is clear to me from this report and from the research that's highlighted in it is the real need for a provincial review on the role of police officers in schools across the province. I know that we've written a letter about that in the past. My hope is that the work that we are doing locally can inform how schools move forward in rebuilding trust, establishing a continuum of care framework for educational partnerships, and focusing on representation and student voice through the implementation process, hopefully at a provincial model. So those are my comments. I do need someone to move to receive this report. Perhaps I'll select Trustee Tutt to move that, and I'll get Trustee Bingham to second that, if that's okay. Is anyone voting against? Hearing no opposition, the report has been received. Up next is a report from staff on our Equity Action Plan. I'll once again turn to the Director, Figueredo, to give us some introduction on the Equity Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. In the standing committee package, Board of Trustees will see the Equity Action Plan report. The first monitoring report was brought last year in June to the Board of Trustees, and I want to thank Michelle Rodney Bartolos, our Principal of Equity, Johanna Tete, Human Rights and Equity Officer, and Paul Denemy, our Superintendent of Student Achievement Equity, whose new portfolio as he transitioned with Superintendent Sharon Stefanian. Again, reminding the Board of Trustees that the action plan was launched 2 years ago. The real focus on our 4 key priority areas: school and classroom practices, governance, leadership, and human resource practices, positive organizational culture and well-being, data collection, integration, and reporting. My apologies. I'll pass over to Superintendent Paul Denemy, who will walk the trustees through the report through a slide deck that was included in the email sent out late this afternoon for the Board of Trustees. Superintendent Paul Denemy, please.
Left.
Thank you. And through the chair, if trustees open their presentations entitled Equity Action Plan Update June 7th, 2011, and turn to 6-1 of the report. I'd like to begin by also thanking Johanna Otete, Michelle Rodney Bartolos, and also Heather Moffat for their work under the Equity Action Plan, but also their work in supporting and creating and writing this report. Also want to highlight that this Equity Action Plan report and update and the work done under the Equity Action Plan doesn't just live within the Equity Department or the Human Rights Department. It lives within every department, school, and classroom to make this come alive and to move forward. So I thank you for many other departments in their support and their work under the Equity Action Plan. It has taken a team to bring our Equity Action Plan to life. If we move to slide 2 of the presentation, just want to highlight the main principles that are guiding our Equity Action Plan, our principles of human rights, equity, and a focus on anti-racism and anti-oppression. This needs to be the focus and the lens of everything that we put into the Equity Action Plan and the actions that we do, and the basis of all the approaches that we take and the lens that we put on our actions.
Welcome to. Thank you. Please stand by. Please state your name after the tone, then press pound. You will now be placed into conference. Joined.
So they're joining. We're just taking a quick break. Go ahead, Mr. Director.
Through the chair, the system is up and working right now as I can hear my voice in the other room.
Perfect. I think we're good to continue. I'll turn it back to our staff to continue the presentation. Thank you once again to Trustee Buck and to the Director for looking into that.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the Black graduation coaches will be running a summer program for their students aimed at raising student engagement and graduation rates. Currently, they have 64% of their students that they service on track to meet their academic goals. If we move to slide 9 and page 6-5 in the report, Human Resource Services staff are on track to complete the majority of the Phase 1 recommendations within the timeline allocated within the Employment Equity Action Plan. I'm going to highlight a number of pieces here within HR. So within the first phase, there were 60 recommendations, and staff have fully implemented 35 of the recommendations already, such as working with local settlement organizations to identify and hire staff who have been trained internationally. 19 of the recommendations are in progress to be finished, such as working to develop a mentorship and leadership program for Black, Indigenous, and racialized educators. 4 of the recommendations were required to be moved into Phase 2 of the Employment Equity Action Plan based on staff resources as well as timelines. It's important to note that the HWDSB Employment Equity Action Plan is a living document and will be updated by the Employment Equity Audit Steering Committee and other feedback from staff and student voice. The committee meets regularly and has already identified the need for additional recommendations based on the timing of the original audit. A professional learning and listening series was just completed, where we saw staff from different employee groups come together to listen to guest speakers discuss human rights, anti-racist and anti-oppression education, equity, and Indigenous cultural safety aspects within the educational field. This was a joint venture between Human Resources, Professional Development, the New Teacher Induction Program, Equity Department, and Indigenous Cultural Safety Department. Over the week-long event, we saw anywhere from 70 to 180 staff and teacher candidates per night attend the live MS Teams events. If we move to slide 10, and it's page 6-6 of your report, Positive Culture and Well-Being, with the goal being to create a positive organizational culture and environment where all students and staff are free from discrimination and harassment. I know there has already been a more detailed report already given regarding this aspect of staff work, so I'm not going to repeat it all, but I'm going to highlight that the human rights and anti-Black racism policy are both in various stages of development. The human rights policy will serve as an anchor to related policies and further HWDSB's commitment to foster and maintain a culture of human rights that permeates in all HWDSB learning and work environments. The policy development plan is finalized, and we will be implementing starting in the fall. This includes 2 phases of consultation with the HWDSB community before and after the draft of the policy. A number of different student voice structures are being fostered with the meetings of our Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+ students, as well as our racialized student networks throughout the last semester for students in grades 7 to 12 who volunteered for these groups. Finally, a resolution officer. HWDSB recently received funding from the Equity Secretariat to support the expansion of the Human Rights team. The plan includes to add support and resources to enable the implementation, update, and establishment of HWDSB's human rights policy and complaints procedure to create a culture of human rights through proactive approaches, informal and formal resolution, and other supports. We're currently hiring for a role that will focus on early resolution, mediation, and human rights education. Slide 11, which is the final slide, and it's in the report on page 6-7, is about data collection, integration, and reporting. Student census has happened. A collection of student identity-based data was administered between May 3rd to May 28th. Participation rates were impacted by the COVID stay-at-home order, so the census will be reopened in September to provide an opportunity for students and families who may have had difficulty engaging remotely. The preliminary report will be coming in the fall of 2021. I'm going to pass it back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much. I appreciate how thorough that report was, and I do feel bad that we had to give that report at 10 o'clock at night, but I think we will do it justice moving forward. I will turn to trustees for questions through roll call in reverse alphabetical order. For this discussion, I'll be enforcing the 5-minute speaking rule, and I will probably ask for an extension to extend our meeting by another half hour in a few minutes. So let's start with Trustee Tutt. Do you have any questions, comments about the report?
None. I think that was a pretty comprehensive report. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Tutt. I'll turn to Trustee Miller.
Just a quick comment to say that, this is a fantastic report. Thank you so much to staff for all the information, and just looking to support this ongoing work. 100%, this should be a living document. It is something that we're going to keep working on as we continue to implement it. But it is work that I'm very proud of at this table. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Miller. I'll now turn to Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll keep my comments short. I also would like to echo my colleagues and offer sincere appreciation and thanks for all of the work that has gone into this extensive plan and has for several years. Very sadly, this evening, our Thames Valley District School Board family, our colleagues and peers, had a horrific and shocking incident take place in their community, and that I think reminds us of why this work, equity work, is so important. That it is so important that we raise the next generation of students, and that we provide current and ongoing education to our own local communities, through our students and through to their families and through to our staff, about equity work, because it has such a direct and immediate impact on the lives of our students and broader community. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnstone. I'll turn to Trustee Deese. Do you have any questions or comments?
No comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Deese. I'll turn to Trustee Danko.
Thank you, and I'll also echo the thanks for the work in the comprehensive report. I did have two questions. One, there was mention that there may be an opportunity for perhaps a session, maybe an information session for trustees to learn a bit more about the approach used for Learn, Disrupt, Rebuild, and I was wondering if that might be a possibility in the fall.
So I'll turn to the Director for that question.
Through the chair, absolutely. I will put it on the work plan and let Trustee Officer Heather Miller know that it's requested from the Board of Trustees, and of course work with the equity team to see what their availability is. But we'll put it on the work plan for the fall. Through the chair.
Thank you, Director. Trustee Danko.
Thank you. And my other question, appreciating that part of the focus is to make sure that we're collecting data and using that to inform our next steps as we're trialing things, we're looking at new frameworks, and we're looking at making sure that we're incorporating data from our student census data in student census in a really meaningful way that has impact. How can we expect to start seeing data relating to the student census, learning and achievement, and the equity work? Where would that come to trustees, and recognizing that we often have a separate learning and achievement report, wondering how trustees will get to see that data and when we might expect it?
Perhaps we'll turn back to the Director and maybe the Superintendent through the Director.
Yes, through the chair. So as trustees know, the student census was up until most recently. The team is reviewing the response rate and looking at any opportunities we might have to revisit if students were coming in person. But that analysis is going to be done over the summer, a full analysis and report to the trustees in the fall. But the most important reason for that data set is to see if there's what patterns are emerging when it comes to our other student achievement results, like patterns that might be emerging around students who may be graduating or may not be graduating, or students in terms of our reading goal, or in terms of students in terms of safety when it comes to suspension and expulsion data. That student census data has to be overlaid to really impact our other key data sets. Those are three I gave examples to. So that work will begin in the fall, but right now the team is reviewing what the response rate has been. I'm thankful that the team persevered and pushed us to continue to implement this, although worried a little bit about how the response rate might have been during this time of remote. However, the review of that is occurring now, and further update will come to the trustees in the fall in terms of where we've landed with that response rate, and then the overlay of that key data set with the other student achievement results and our positive culture and well-being data as well is integral. It can't stand alone. It has to be aligned to tell us what patterns are emerging regarding our student achievement and positive culture well-being data sets. Through the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Before I turn it back to you, Trustee Danko, I do need a motion to extend by 15 minutes. Perhaps I'll get you to move that, and I'll get Trustee Buck to second that, if that's okay. Is anyone voting against? Perfect, okay. Motion passes. Back to you, Trustee Danko.
That really answers my question. It was really around ways in which the data will come forward as opposed to just when the results might be published. So I appreciate the in-depth answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now turn it to Trustee Buck.
No questions or comments, but thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Bigham?
No questions. Just a huge thank you to staff and everyone involved in pulling all of this information together, because this is, as we say, it's comprehensive. There's reason for it. massive amount of work goes into this, and really do appreciate. I know the students will appreciate it as well. The families will appreciate it. And I'm very happy to know that this is considered a living document as well. We need more of those, as far as I'm concerned, because too many things change too quickly over the years, and we need to make sure that we can keep up with those changes as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Bingham. I'll now turn to Trustee Archer. Do you have any questions or comments?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Student Trustee Hessler, any comments or questions?
No questions nor comments. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll just add myself to the speakers list again because I do want to echo the comments from my colleagues. One of the things that I'm continually impressed by with the Equity Action Plan is how staff is able to adapt to really the circumstances and the changing times that we're dealing with at any given moment. It's one thing to plan ahead and create a multi-year strategy. It's another thing to actually be able to amend that strategy as it's ongoing, and appreciating the comments around the living and fluidity around this action plan, because it really allows us to address the needs and concerns of a lot of our students, particularly the most marginalized and the ones that face the most inequity. So I'm happy to see the work that's being done. Of course, a lot more can always be done. I think I speak on behalf of trustees when I say that we're always here to offer support whenever it's needed. So huge appreciation of staff there, and thank you to trustees for continuing to support this work. At this time, I do need a trustee to move to receive this report. Perhaps I'll get Trustee Buck to move that, seconded by Trustee Archer, if that's okay. Is anyone voting against? Hearing no opposition, the report is received. That concludes our meeting tonight. I do need a motion to adjourn. I'll look to Trustee Tutt and Trustee Danko to second that. Is anyone voting against? Meeting is adjourned. Thanks so much, everybody. I appreciate it.
Left, 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 left. The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.